everybody for making the time. So we're live streamed now. Thank you. Do I need to become the host again?
Yes, you can become the host now.
Okay, I just reclaimed it. We're good to go?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, thank you, Zora. Okay, welcome everybody to this section of the second year design studio, the final reviews. I want to thank the jurors for joining us today from various parts of the world. It's great to see everybody, and I wanted to thank you for making the time. This is the grad section of the second year design studio. The grad students started this summer with an abbreviated program. Was it 6 or 8 weeks? I think it's 6 weeks. Is that correct? I don't see any faces. So 6 or 8 weeks, Charlie?
I think it was 10, if I'm
10 weeks. Okay. It's a blur at this point. So a 10-week program that introduced them to the design curriculum, and then they segued in comparison to a full year that is normally part of the undergraduate studies. And then they segued into the second year fall semester. The jurors today, or the critics today rather, are, as I said, a wonderful group of people, starting with Margarita Jover, who's joining us from Tulane. She's the co-founder of Alday Jover Architecture and Landscape, and associate professor of architecture at Tulane University. She previously taught at the University of Virginia, and she also authored a series of books. One of them is a book titled Ecologies of Prosperity, and also a book about one of her practices projects, the Water Park. Welcome, Margarita. Marianne Damaris is an architect, educator, and visual artist. She holds a master's degree actually from Tulane University and also from Cranbrook. Her architectural practice includes a broad range of project types. And she has an architectural and very successful artist practice here in New Orleans, and is a professor of practice at the School of Architecture, where she teaches in the core studios, specifically first year. Welcome, Marianne. Andy Sternat, am I pronouncing this right, Andy? And I apologize for you being introduced as Rami Diaz.
No problem.
We had a last minute exchange of jurors, and that wasn't correctly communicated, but I wanted to thank you for joining us today. Andy is a leader of Wagoner and Ball's resilience practice here in New Orleans. He was a key participant in the Dutch Dialogues, which is a collaboration, or was a collaboration, ongoing collaboration between Dutch and American engineers, where they thought about re-envisioning New Orleans' relationship with water, specifically after Hurricane Katrina. He's also a lead author of the Greater New Orleans Urban Water Plan, which earned a National Planning Excellence Award from the American Planning Association. And I believe, Andy, we haven't met in person yet, but I believe you're focused on specific aspects of that water plan, and also worked with hydraulic and hydrological approaches in that regard. So welcome, and thank you for making the time and joining us. Nice to see you.
Thanks.
Ruth Berchtold is the founder and owner of Yes Architecture in Munich, Germany, which is also has a dependance in New York. She is a tenured professor at the University of Applied Sciences in Munich, and her field of research is architectural design and conceptual approach to computer integrated design. She teaches a variety of courses in Munich. We're actually collaborating on a couple of them this semester, which has been a wonderful experience. So welcome, Ruth, and thank you for dedicating your evening to us. It's already past 8 o'clock in Germany. And finally, Marcella Del Signore is joining us from New York. She's an architect, urbanist, educator, scholar, and the principal of Extopia. a design research practice that explores the intersection of architecture and urbanism with technology and the public, social, and cultural realm. She's an associate professor and director of the Master of Science in Architecture, Urban and Regional Design at the New York Institute of Technology. Her work investigates architecture, environments, and cities, not as isolated entities, but as part of an extended field mediated through the application of technology. Welcome, Marcella. Thank you for joining us. I don't think I forgot anybody. So I wanted to thank all of you again for making the time. And with that, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to jump into the presentations, unless somebody has a question preceding the presentations. No? Okay, great. So I will share my screen. Bear with me for 1 second. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Great. And Zora also posted the live stream link into the chat for those of you that want to share it with friends and family. So, and with that, we're going to start with Parker. We have 8 projects to review. Carrie already gave an introduction to the site. The students will introduce their approach, reasoning for location choice within the site, siting of the project, and then the design strategy more specifically. Parker, you ready?
Yes.
Great.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Parker Heitzman, and this is the Jefferson Island Design Proposal. So the strategy for the Educational Center design aims to intentionally compare the previous industrial heritage of the site with today's, quote, natural landscape, placing the structure at the water's edge, specifically over top the mine shaft, allows the concept of the juxtaposition to connect the vestiges of history with the current ecosystem there today. After visiting the site and creating research analysis diagrams to compare the previous and current made-man systems with natural systems pictured in the analysis diagrams at the top, we began creating partie diagrams to form the overarching concept of the design. This partie model aims to enhance the dialogue between the man-made versus natural and anchors the history and highlights the mine shaft. It was and will still be the central feature of the site's operations. The roof and site plan show the northwest orientation, providing diffused light into the gallery spaces. The visitors approach the building from the east and are able to view the different remnants along their travels to the building to create an entire experience upon arrival. When leaving the structure, visitors can simply leave the way they came or continue westward to explore the landscape beyond. Its placement was justified through its close connection to the mine facilities, the shaft itself, and the vertical extraction points along the site, which we can see in the site section below. Ultimately, locating it here highlights the existence of the process of resource extraction, which took place that is centered around that mine shaft. So the photo collage includes over 400 photos taken by our very own students to highlight the themes and observations made during our visit. The denser areas in the composition are parts of the site that I took specific interest in. So the model at the top illustrates the void of the shaft and how it visually and physically engages with its guests. It also depicts how the structure is partially embedded into the ground, allowing it to form a relationship with the landscape. When entering the building, as we can see in the plans, the visitor can either go to the right or left and is guided by the curved walls at the entry for intuitive wayfinding. To the right, there is a cafe which overlooks an old train car and the lake beyond, and a small lobby with information about the site. If visitors choose to do so, they can continue outside to the gathering or sitting area and a space to interact with the mine shaft outdoors. To the left of the entry, the visitors will be invited to the gallery spaces and the reading and archive room. The gallery space is provided with skylights and a clerestory window for illumination of the pieces in the exhibit. And additionally, there are stairs where the guests can descend down into the video exhibition or classroom that's below ground. The main landmark feature in the space is the floor-to-ceiling glass wall around the mine shaft, which vertically connects the two levels. In addition, it allows the visitors to view the shaft as an exhibition piece. On the second level, you can step into the mine shaft onto the graded metal podium-like structure where you can physically interact with the shaft. The axonometrics show the proximity to the remaining structures in the lake side. And to the right of the axonometrics are the section-in-section perspectives, which emphasize the connection of the mine shaft with the building and the landscape. You can also see the cafe on the far right, which is embedded into the ground and provides an eye-level viewing opportunity for the history remaining on the other side of the glass. And then the interior perspective displays the mine shaft and gallery space. The gallery space features the sand wall to serve as a backdrop for the exhibition pieces. And the large glass on the right allows the visitors to again look straight down for hundreds of feet down the mine shaft. And lastly, the exterior perspectives show the overarching goal for this proposal, which is ultimately to create not only an education place of the site's industrious past, but to also connect it with the site's landscape, which is now present today. Thank you.
Thank you, Parker.
Can I ask a question right away?
Please do.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the landscape that you're embedding your building in, and for me, just listening to you and looking at your building, which is a square building, I had the feeling that you're not exactly working with the topology, but maybe just making your own typology. So that was one question. How do you respond to the typology? Because we see a lot of different levels, and your building just seems to be there as a singular stark landmark. So it's not a critique. I'm just wondering. Then I'm also wondering about the material. Why did you use the kind of reddish brick in that neighborhood? And then my last question: how far do you think? Because you said you can look down hundreds of feet in a mine shaft. Do you have any lights in there? How do you think people would see that far? Sorry, very pragmatic German questions.
First, the selection of brick was to reuse materials that are there all along the water's edge and near where the industrious site was. There's like used or pre-used brick, and so I plan to reuse that as a sustainable measure. And then for the mine shaft, I intended to not put lights in it because I kind of wanted the look, you can see down as far as you can until it's just black, to kind of emphasize how deep into the ground it is. And so that was my approach for that. And then the last question was about topography, right?
The topology and why you didn't react more to the existing site, why you just planted your very man-made rectangle square into the site and not dealt more with the lines that the natural topography would provide for you. So
my concept revolved around the mine shaft, and so I couldn't pick that up and move it somewhere else. So my site is there specifically for the shaft, and then I embedded it enough to where you could see out into the view on one end, and then the other end being almost completely in the ground, if that makes sense. So from on the left, I'm not sure if, no, my other
Okay,
section.
thank you very much.
Okay.
I quite like the overall plan relationship to the mine shaft, the way that you align in a sort of glancing way. You don't quite hit it on center, but I think the question about topography is really apt. And this is such a unique site in the world, but especially in Louisiana, to have the topography of this nature. I think there's really an opportunity with such a formally pure volume of building to either embed it more in some way that disrupts that purity, or set it apart in a way that accentuates the topography around it. And in section especially, you have this sort of almost square form as well in plan and section. I think that might have been an opportunity, or in a next iteration, to think about how that pure square form sets itself within the landscape or apart from it.
Okay.
That
Thank
makes
you.
it's sort of a Monday morning quarterbacking kind of critique, but I think there's so much possibility with a form like this in the landscape that you could have pushed it just a little bit more. But
from my side, so I see the project being really clear in its partie, as you call it, with the contrast between a pure form that is a circular inherited shaft, and then the position of the square. Perhaps where, in my view, what it's maybe less clear is the other forms that you're adding to the echoes of the curves, that type of movement here or here. So these might be less part of the partie. So I think maybe being more radical on your first moves of the contrast between the cube, let's say this pure formal thing, and this, making that even stronger in the way that you, for example, you go down to the shaft with a spiral or even upwards. So expanding more the echoes of that decision of making the shaft really present, even more present, maybe in roof or verticality, and then the cube being even more radical in the way it's contrasting with the wilderness of the site. Having this kind of a fight of a nature, wilderness, and human presence with the geometry, the two geometries, the circle and the square, even more and more clear. I think that the project has super good bones. I would be less shy and more bold in the way you kind of steer these two ideas. But I think it's clear. Yeah.
I think you can defend yourself here, Parker. Not defend, but comment.
I did have a very similar idea in my first iteration, and after mid-review, I evolved it to what it is now. So I see where you're coming from with that critique. Thank you.
So Parker, at mid-review, you had amplified the relationship with the shaft as Margarita's suggested?
Yes, there was a spiral stair that took you to the second level.
So I would like to amplify something that I think Andy said, and also Margarita, this distinction between the built form and the landscape, and kind of pushing that in a very bold way. I almost think that folks should kind of walk onto that roof upon entry and then move down to a almost completely submerged building through the shaft and feel the ground fall away and start to occupy those the depth, like the darkness as you move down, to really get a visceral experience of what was there and the relationship of the mine to the landscape in a very dramatic way.
Okay.
Because I think you mentioned that in your presentation, right? The severe juxtaposition between the built and the landscape in this site.
Right.
I think there are two systems right now that operate together. I think one is the section and one is the plan. So in other words, I think that the shaft, so you really have the intersection of two systems. One is the vertical shaft and one is the path that goes through the building.
Mhm.
And I think right now, it seems to me that both of them coexist, but none of them is really pushing your project to the next level. What I'm missing here is the experiential quality of what it's like to being in your building. For instance, I think the fact of when you show the section, the way in which, again, I would have liked to see a view from the shaft looking at the sky. And this, I think, is quite critical to begin to tell the story of how the building operates within the building itself, but within the landscape. So what's interesting is that you start to play, with the with sort of industrial archaeology, heritage as a component that you engage within your project, but which is not only the shaft, but to me, the path that goes through the building is as critical as the shaft. For instance, I have a question. I'm not sure where now. I mean, we see where it starts, but I'm not sure where it ends and what actually you see out when you get to the end of the path. So that path, it's a way to, again, not only enter and start the procession through the building, but go through your building. So enter, go through, and then there is an end point. And that end point is as important as the starting point or the node of the building itself. So almost to me, you're working with at least 3 nodes, which is the starting point of the path, the building as another node, and then the end point of the path. All of that connected with the sectional components that engage the shaft into the project. So I think that the project, what it's doing right now internally in terms of how the program is organized and also how the paths start to enter, I think can do much more. And I think you started doing that, right? Because when the narrow path entered the building, opens up and start to articulate the distribution of the program. But perhaps there is also another maybe sectional component that is engaged within this pure box. So I think the intersection could have been maybe an operative strategy for you to not only look at this as it is right now, right, between plan and section, but begin to also modify and see what happens within the building itself. So I'm missing a little bit also the relationship within with the context. So materiality is quite important because perhaps when again, I think we see on some of this, but one side is completely closed. And is the roof occupiable too?
No, the roof is not occupiable.
So that's a question, the material, right? So why is it that? Is it mimicking what's there? Is it how the roof could have provided perhaps a third topographic level, let's say more artificial, of course, to be able to see what's around and maybe begin to see actually the shaft from above. That would have been quite interesting, looking down and looking up at the same time. But I appreciate the way in which, again, you engage with the history of the site and you engage with the shaft as a primary component to reorganize and redefine mostly the planar condition of the project.
I think the comment in regards to the like creating this view looking up from inside the shaft up to the sky is a really useful one to maybe think about generating that view as an additional component if you feel inclined to do so, because it would really establish that relationship, right? That is really at the core of the major ideas here, which is centering or organizing the building around this shaft. And I think it's fair to say that you've gone through a variety of different versions in that regard, to locate the building or the structure or components of it, parts of it around the shaft, and see what the reaction is or what the possible dialogue is. And you settled on this one, which I think is good because it offers a lot of opportunities. But I think, and that's a general comment as part of the semester. We talked a lot about, certainly the relationship of the building to the site, what dictates the siding, right? Like how is that sectional relationship and planar relationship to the specific contextual configuration expressed and also challenged and exploited in a way, right? So, and I think by choosing the shaft as a focal point, I think you've done a very good job, situating your building and also exploring, the consequences that come from that. There's always a variety of different options that could be pursued. Thinking about plan and section as as areas of intersection, right, and as two systems that can work together productively is a good one. And I think you're incorporating that here, and that's kind of the basis of the design. So. So good job. But I would add that you looking from the shaft up, I think, getting into the ground and really getting into the building, it would be really useful.
Yeah.
And if I could make one quick other comment, Parker, I really wanted to mention how productive I think the photo collage that you did is, and I would love to imagine that as a strategy of representation, right? This idea of focus and blur in your representation of the building spaces and the views from the building.
That's a great point.
It's an additional, requirement that was thrown upon the section by their instructor, and I think all of them rose up to that challenge, and Parker did really a fantastic job, a very laborious job of, putting this together and carefully selecting the images and the collaboration of images within this collage. I think this is quite a fantastic piece of art. I would actually print this out and hang it on my wall if I was you, or sell it as posters.
I actually think it's a strategy for working, right?
Yes,
and
in addition.
I could only imagine this as a conceptual underpinning for your future work. I'd really very much like to see what might come from this kind of a strategy.
Yeah.
There's something about dislocation of view within it too that relates to the shaft in a potentially productive way. But it was strange to see it on screen at first, sort of pixelated. I thought my screen hadn't caught up to the image. Consequence of virtual review.
Okay, great. Any other comments to Parker's project? Okay, then we'll move on to.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Parker. And we move on to Charlie.
Okay, so thank you to Professor Rosa Gray and the teaching team for taking us to this point, and thank you to the jury for being here from time zones close and afar. When I was given a tour of the site and I surveyed it for myself, one characteristic of the site or element of the site that was most endearing was the long and meandering paths and opportunities for exploration. I was reminded of Corbusier's Ronchamp and how celebrated that progression is. So while developing ideas and prototypes for the site, they all sought to add circulation opportunities and not subtract from them. The peninsula became the focus of the proposal for two reasons. Firstly, it is the most remote part of the site, so progressing towards it presents the history of the site visually, such as the lake itself, the mine shaft, the piers, and the rail infrastructure, before the program of the proposal itself could have the opportunity to present these. Secondly, the peninsula has a unique terraced and steppe topography. Finding a way to engage this terracing became a North Star throughout the proposal's iterations. If you look at the very top left image, it took many different shapes. Originally, the far ends of it existed on land, but I was further challenged to extend those ends into the water. The proposal was placed specifically on the peninsula nearest to the narrower end of it to more easily span it, but also in the attempt or the idea of preserving the experience of reaching the end of the peninsula without any intervention. Initially, the orientation of the proposal was set parallel to the direction of the rain runoff and perpendicular to the peninsula itself. This was changed after consideration of just the damage that human occupation has made upon the site. So a gesture contrarian to the landscape was deemed inappropriate. In its current iteration, various existing grids and angles were considered, and the proposal is oriented not to create any right angles. So in a way, it subtly acknowledges both intentional and unintentional elements of the site. The form of the proposal is visually similar to Super Studio's continuous monument, but functions in a drastically different way. While the continuous monument exists as a barrier, the project, as mentioned, intends to not interfere with on-site circulation and furthermore expand upon these opportunities. One may pass through, under, and over the proposal. Although fairly large, the dry surface area that the proposal actually occupies is rather low, only making contact, as you can see in the elevation or the site section, upon the very topmost part of the terracing element on the peninsula. Most of the volume in the program are concentrated on the northern slope to minimize distractions that the occupants of the exhibits to the north. On the south, the cafe announces its presence and invites those approaching from across the bay. If we look at the plans, we can see that you enter through the ground floor to the second floor, through the center where the opportunity exists to go through the proposal. And you may turn to the right or to the left. On the right, as mentioned, the north slope houses most of the exhibit program, some back of house elements, while the southern slope houses mostly back of house with the cafe element. The roof of the proposal provides public space along with the interior central part on the ground floor. These public spaces offer opportunities for socialization and outdoor classes. And that is my proposal, the proposal.
You want to talk a little bit about the section again and your views?
So in the views, yeah, I tried to capture sort of the amount of people that the proposal can house as the design process went along. More and more length was added to it. So part of the narrative that I'd been creating was that it was capable of housing a lot of people. So I tried to sort of incorporate or communicate that through my views, just the sheer magnitude of people that could experience the proposal.
I have a question.
Okay.
Yes.
Is your proposal increasing significantly the amount of the square footage? How's your response to the given program?
Yeah.
To the given
So
program?
I met originally the amount of square footage that was required of me, and that as the proposal was lengthened and reorientated, that increased quite a bit. But I feel that the overall surface area that it actually occupies on dry surface is fairly low. So it doesn't have an ecological consequence, this expansion of square footage, or as much as it could, rather.
Is your building on pontons? I mean, when I looked at the graphic where you show your bar moving, I was all excited because I thought you're just going to use the island as sort of a pivot point, and the building would flip around. Now I have the feeling that you sort of grounded it after all, because I see some posts going down. So
yes, the building does not rotate. It conceptually rotated, but it does not rotate in practice. It is anchored, yes, on peloti that extend underneath the surface of the water, and certain points near the middle.
So what happens in the lower parts where you have very high ceiling heights versus the upper, let's say, bridge with the lower ceiling heights? Why that distinction? Is one an exhibition space and the other one a visitor center, or?
the height of the ceiling does not determine sort of function. It's more slope, so the north slope houses more of the exhibit space with some back of house elements, while the rear sort of houses the back of house elements with the cafe. The difference in height has more to do with engaging the level of the terrace it's interacting with. So in order to support the top level, but engage the lower slope, that roof had to be the space from floor to ceiling was a little higher.
Mhm. Can I jump in? I don't know if someone is good. Yeah, Charlie, I I see your project being bold and delicate at the same time, which is something really special, no? To have this contrast of two totally different, the attitude of being not touching the island with a bold movement, no? So that arch that you are, I would only encourage for more clarity in terms of the circulation, for example. So on the volume where I guess the cafe is on the west, it's clear that you have this stair inside, and on the other shorter volume you have a stair on the facade. So I think that the stairs might not come as part of the bold movement. I was wondering if, having read from Le Corbusier, Promenade and all that, I think exploring also a ramping system that is embedded into this arch might give the facade another texture that is a little bit more perhaps dynamic and solid at the same time. So the idea of excavating this volume. Anyway, I think it's clear, it's really bold, and perhaps even being longer into the ground, into the water, as something more visible or floating into the water apparently, and the ramping system. But otherwise, I think the partie is really clear. And then I have a question in relation to the thickness of this building. Is that, which is the tension between square footage, no? That you were asking, square footage, and because I find it perhaps extremely, maybe too narrow, but I guess that's the condition of your.
Oh, I was
concerned,
concerned it was too wide. I was actually trying to narrow it more and more, just to. Yeah, because I understand that it's very large, and but interesting to hear.
Yeah. My only point will be to work on the ramping system that is part of this mass of the facade of the arch. As a strategy.
Could you explain that a little bit further? What do you mean?
Yeah, so I can draw quickly that in a way. So annotating. So you have this stair here, and then you have this that is here, and I wonder if something like a ramping system that takes the whole facade even here as an ad hoc that can go in and out into the different places, making the arch also a place of circulation, from the inside to the outside in a systematic way, and that can be part of the facade story. So you have this movement in this direction and also in this direction. So you go and then take the ramping, and maybe that can even extend into the water pier kind of thing. So to make it like super like long.
I understand.
I'm interested in the ask you the question about, again, at the beginning, because I'm interested again in the kind of infrastructural aspect of your project. And so your project, it does a lot of things, I think, at the same time. So it's a bridge, it's a long bridge with a long span, and we can talk more about that. But at the same time, I think it creates multiple opportunities to experience the landscape. And so not only that, I think it provides let's say more a direct connection between the left and the right, but at the same time, I think you in the diagram that you have with the rotation, somehow to me there are two directionality that happens at the same time. One, it's going through the bridge, and the bridge is really going towards the water, and the bridge is a sort of an entry point to actually view the landscape. So it's also a viewing device, even though it's pretty large, thinking about inhabiting the landscape much more from afar, not really close. But also at the same time, it starts to provide this directionality into the site, a new directionality into the site that is not there right now, that connects the left and the right. So I think it starts to play somehow really a very delicate balance between man-made and what's the man-made and nature. And where in a way nature, to me, to your project, they start to be reconstructed with the different points of view that you begin to provide and the different moments in which you experience the landscape. So from above the bridge, on top of the bridge, inside the bridge itself as an infrastructure, etc. So I appreciate that about your project. Then we can talk about, okay, do we need to increase program? We need to decrease program. That's a whole another discussion. But to me, the key is in two things. Two layers. Number one is to begin to see what's inside and what's outside, because it's clear, but perhaps the fact that, again, it's more the pure project acting more as an infrastructure, perhaps the program, the enclosed program, is just moments that are enclosed within an open system, within an open surface. So what I mean by that is that you go, you can occupy the top layer, right? So it's a kind of long promenade on top, but then we have some of the views that is programmed inside that works as a, enclosed pockets of that are sequenced also, from the left to the right. So my question to you, it's perhaps to further define what's above and what's below, not what's above or zero, but what's open and what's not open, because perhaps not all the connections are open. Are enclosed, and I think the system of connectivity, some is completely open air, some can be enclosed, etc. So where you begin to actually subtract even more from what's there. So I'm almost thinking, going back. So I think if you look at early Shumi, we look at Parc de la Villette, we look at the Follies that in scale are much smaller than what you have, but in a way is not. The program is very small. And it's enclosed within a kind of infrastructural device that it orients yourself within the landscape. So I think this project can speak about that a little bit and open up even more to what's around and minimize the impact of the infrastructure now, or the building, or whatever we want to call it. I don't know if you can call it a building, right, within the existing landscape. So I think even the early work of Bernard Tschumi that looks at the ramp, looks at the circulation as an experiential device, and that's what you're doing. So I think in your project that could be as a next step, I know that's the final, but thinking about what's next from this work, a calibration between with the curating, I think more in detail, how your device, infrastructural device, is able to orient people within the landscape. And this to me, again, it's not about enclosing program necessarily, but quite the opposite. Exposing, from this bridge, what's around. I mean, I'm thinking, perhaps I want to put everything into a kind of a gridded system that it's open, but it's an infrastructure that it's able to hold more enclosed program. But I appreciate the kind of the bold movement somehow that is able to kind of think in a different way, perhaps within the site.
I think there's a conceptual question which I still can't quite figure out where you stand, and the Super Studio reference throws me off a little bit, because that was meant to be a totalizing form, something so completely dominant. And I don't think that's what you're doing. And I don't think that's what you're intending. I think you're doing something a bit more nuanced and maybe reacting or playing against that idea. But I can't tell if this wants to be either 3 times bigger or 3 times smaller. I can't tell if it's the right size. And I think that's part of the underlying question is your perspective on the landscape. And it may be if there were some kind of indication of the building's peripheral impact on site, its access points, pathways, sense of arrival, where you're coming from and what you're seeing, whether you're trying to set up the building as a frame to look through, or something that's meant to deny, or somehow give you a sense of payoff once you finally make your way through the threshold to the end of that little appendix of a peninsula. So I think a landscape approach that would help clarify what the building is meant to do. I think also, I saw at first your section where you're just barely touching the top of the hillside really makes me uncomfortable and kind of angry. Like, it's so close to touching. Do you want it to touch, or do you want it not to touch? Well, don't answer that. Okay. But I think it. When I think about it more, there's some productive tension in there that you might play on, and I don't know. There's just something about that one moment that I can't figure out, and I want to know more. But maybe that's the point.
It's fair to say that we have had several discussions about that, and like every time I look at it, I cringe as well, but not necessarily in a good or bad way. I just, I think, Charlie, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we settled on the fact that, this gesture, opens conversation about it.
But
so,
since you enter there, though, you really are stepping off the ground into the building, which I think does kind of beckon to just set the building a little bit more in that center point, and also to take advantage. I mean, you have to grab efficiency where you can. So it makes perfect sense to support the bar, even if you kind of hide that from us a bit, but really to touch ground there. And I would say that could then free you, I think, from the dilemma of the bridge, right? This idea is why you have too much building. And what I mean by that is, if you think about this bar as kind of a needle, on the north side, where the exhibition is grounded by the pillar of salt that nobody's talked about yet, right? But you guys have to have that kind of big chunk of salt in the building, right? And that artifact has gravity, and it makes sense that on the north side you'd have kind of the bigger the bigger footprint of square footage for exhibition, and you'd have that piece. And then going the other way towards I guess the south end, the cafe could really just be floating over the water, and your pilotis could solve the problem for you, right? So if you're thinking about it, you could just have the bar, and then it could just be supported with, pretend like I'm drawing thin things, right, Charlie? Yeah. And then you don't have to have as much building. And you can work with this idea of the attenuated projection on one end and the grounded exhibition and square footage and the story of the place on the other end. And then perhaps think about exhibition and the quality of light, and how the facade on the north face of a long building in the south might have more opportunity for openness. And then on the south side, perhaps circulation and the promenade and the overhang all occur to work with the climate and ways to engage the facade relative to the conceptual, the orientation, both conceptual and in real, that you worked out.
I understand.
The question of touching or not touching is an interesting one. No? It can either come to resolve the detail of that touching the ground, if it's either like 1 foot above and it's made out of several layers, or it's a ramping system that gets you there. Because the fact that if you touch the ground, you lose the arch in a way for perspective view. So yeah, maybe further questioning that into the detail will.
It has been at ground level and above various different times, back and forth.
Right.
That's a detail that's been changed constantly throughout the lifespan of this proposal.
Why did you end up with this solution?
So essentially at first, having it, my first intuition was to set it at ground level. But then that sort of implied a moving under and not through. Whereas elevating it just the slightest bit created the experience of moving through versus moving under.
Okay. I wholeheartedly agree on the several comments in regards to the scale of the building. It's you know, it's a little bit unclear where it wants to position itself. And looking at your presentation today, Charlie, I almost think it should be much bigger than it is. I know that poses some concerns in regards to the square footage, but maybe not everything has to be filled with program. But I feel like it's already on its way to this specific kind of statement it's making, but it's not quite there yet. It's a little timid, and I think like exploring variation in scale might be interesting just to see what it generates. Because you didn't really do that yet to like a full extent. It has been hovering around the size, right?
Most of the extent, just to maintain square footage, I've been extending it and shrinking it through the middle. So that was a way of playing with the scale, but not really affecting the program.
Well, maybe there are other architectural maneuvers, a screen or a canopy, or a screen could double the perceived scale of the thing if that's the conceptual intent, without affecting the program.
Yeah, or the suggestion to really conceptually, and I think that's where you actually came from, consider the building as a gridded system almost, or as not literally as a scaffolding, but a scaffolding of sorts that allows for program to be placed more loosely, but then to extend the footprint, right, or the kind of the envelope of the building, without getting in conflict there. I also like the idea of, or the suggestion of thinking about the ramping and stair system as being something that is, if I understood that correctly, kind of exaggerated certainly, but also embedded, right, or carved out of the building rather than functioning as an add-on. I think that would be really interesting to look at or understand what that means. Okay, great. Any other comments or observations?
Just want
By
to
the
say,
way,
I think there are, Charlie, maybe that's something, that you try, but I think there are definitely opportunities to make this lighter, keeping the same type of relationship with the landscape. So I think it's the matter of begin to see solid versus surface versus points and how they begin to operate. I think even within the existing way in which the building is right now. And the fact that I think that the section, also you're drawing this as a it's a building, but also it's a common traditional building. So maybe there is another way in which you can begin to draw this proposal through the lens of your intention, what you're trying to do. Yeah. Right? Because I think the one thing that is not so convincing to me are actually the three-dimensional views. And these are key, because I think there are two ways to look at your project, right? The plan and the section is really top down, but the way in which I really want to see your project is from the perspectives. And so some of them are kind of not even real, the perspective is not quite right in one of them on the top left. So it seems that I think the kind of experience from being inside or being on the multiple different spaces that you're providing to that, it's key. And maybe that's something for your portfolio, but I will really push now the projects even to, to curate and select what are the key moments to looking out, because that's what you're doing. That's really the project, right? Besides the relationship between scale and program and site. So that, I think that's something that needs to be added.
I totally agree with this. And maybe the views are really from afar. So with this idea of land art, and how do you approach with a boat and sunset and all this and the color palette and all of that.
In a way, the model photographs do a better job, positioning the project, right, and explaining its approach and its attitude. I think they're really helpful, actually. Yeah,
I totally agree. And as you consider setting up other views, I think you can reveal your perspective that way. For example, if a faraway view is set to be directly perpendicular to the long face, then you indicate sort of a primacy of the building in the landscape, even if you step back far enough that the building's no longer primary in the view, for example, or approaching from the island side. How do you orient yourself in relation to the building in the view you choose?
And then can you show the diagram of the solar or the different orientations of your, here in that one, with this idea of expanding the scaffolding beyond the site. You can even arrive further into other locations in a way that the buildings start to be almost dispersed. So you have a piece here, a piece here, a piece here. And that relationship, it's almost astronomical. Like an astronomy of the building, where you see the view from here reflected somewhere else here, no? Kind of a...
Great. Thank you so much, Charlie. This diagram is super helpful. Very good diagram, actually. Okay, excellent. If there are no further comments, we're going to move to Alan's project.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Charlie. And Alan, for some reason, we didn't pin up in the presentation order, but it doesn't really matter. Okay. So.
Great.
Here we go.
All right. Thank you again to all of you for taking the time to be here. We very much appreciate you. This proposal is an observatory intending to inspire contemplation and reverence to the land and its propensity for regeneration. Using the work of Maya Lin as a precedent, this proposal uses the landscape and sculptural elements to tell the story. The site is selected because it exists on the axis of exploitation and nature, taking advantage of the tension that exists between opposites. The circular nature of the building is intended to represent regeneration while also allowing the visitor to observe the site and the spectrum of human intervention on the land. The approach takes advantage of existing paths which lead to the natural stone stepping path that leads the visitor to a small circular courtyard that enters the building to a double-story glass view of Lake Pinure and the natural elements present on the site. The visitor then can experience the drastic change in views by entering the landmine exhibit to the left, which has glass walls facing both the sinkhole and the mine shaft. On the opposite side of the building, one can go upstairs to the cafe and the reading room, where the culmination of the experience takes place on the roof, which one can enter through the second floor, just past the cafe. The exterior slatting is placed east and west strategically to prevent morning and summer sun. And the rooftop would have a native plant exhibit to represent the regrowth potential on the site. The entire structure sits on a piece of terrain that descends about 12 feet, allowing it to sit gently on pillars and to appear as though it's almost gently floating on the terrain. That is my presentation.
That's it.
Okay, then I'm going to storm in again. You're putting your building sort of on a pedestal. I mean, that's how it looks like in the model on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, it looks like that's the other side, I guess. That on the left-hand side, it looks like that whole kind of curly snail is going rather down. So then you show it as sort of a round building, but then in the drawings, it's hexagonal or whatever you would call, octagonal, whatever you would call it. You should probably talk a little bit more about what is the shape, what does the landscape do, how important is the view towards the water, and where exactly is your shaft?
So this is not actually the mine shaft. If you look at the diagram, you can see that the windows overlook yes, this one, overlook the sinkhole, which is in the lake, as well as the mine shaft. So it's not sitting on the shaft. As far as the diagrams being faceted, the overall, the rooftop garden and the concrete base are circular to mimic the stones surround the stone path that sort of ascends to the place. But the faceted windows, I faceted them because they sort of act as frames as you pass through the land, and each exhibit would sort of overlook the area that you were observing.
Okay, and can you say something about the landscaping or the topography? I mean, it sits in a section, it sits totally flat. And yet you have built this whole amphitheater around it. And also your three-dimensional shape is spiraling towards, higher up and is not overlooking the water, but it's overlooking the other side. So there must be a reason for that. You have an amphitheater on facing the water, but the top of your building is actually looking towards the amphitheater. And so that's a bit confusing.
That I see the confusion there. That's not entirely an amphitheater. Those are sort of stones set in the path. So it's just to sort of set this exhibit aside from, because the site is sort of jarring in that where this exists, where this on one side is an old salt mine, so it's very disturbed. The soil is not soil, it's just dirt. And then on the other side is this beautiful lake. So the reason I chose to do a circle was to allow the visitor to see the whole range, the spectrum essentially of human intervention on this space. So it's not you exit the cafe and you can walk all the way to the top. That entire rooftop would be a rooftop garden. So it's not overlooking the amphitheater, but I see how. Yes, I see how.
In the renderings, it looks a little bit like that. And
yes,
did you ever think about meandering towards the earth, like into the earth in a section? It looks like it's sitting there plain flat. And again, where is your shaft?
The shaft, do you mean the salt mine or the salt shaft, the mine shaft?
Yeah.
It's, could you point to it, Cordula? Sorry.
Is this what that is?
That's what that is. Yes.
Okay.
It's over there. So it's not, you can see it from the faceted window, but you couldn't see it from when you first enter through. So I understand the confusion being that Parker's was a circle around the shaft, but this is a different site. It's slightly different. Hers, I'm just slightly to the west of her.
Okay, then again, the question, did you never think about going into the earth? Because you made this nice sculpture and then you sit so flat on the ground.
You know, I intentionally had it slightly elevated. And it's only slightly elevated. The incline it's about a 12-foot incline from the first stone that is laid to the back of the building. So it's a very slight incline, which enables you to see the entire site from the building. And I liked that it was sitting gently on the land. I thought that was a good representation of the intention of the building, which is to be gentle to this land that has been sort of abused in its recent history.
Thank you.
Ellen, based on your explanation, I see your project really much focused on this idea of 360 views and frames. That is an overview of the different conditions of the site at large, the specific one where you're sitting on really delicately, and the long history of the site with a 360 view. And then I can understand the tension between the frames and the circle that might be perhaps more visible if the building was taking on a bigger diameter, I think. So the fact that it's a circle that is so small makes it unclear what is the position you're taking. No? If that same project would have been, let's say, I guess, larger in diameter, for example, just write, let me see if I can write. I cannot write anyway, but yeah, something that is slightly bigger, the frames would be perhaps more visible, and the movement of circle also, because it's almost a dot now. No? I think it's in a way that amplitude can also affect the way you're touching the ground, perhaps, because if it's longer, the ramping system can achieve more height. And so it's more visible, the up and down movement you may do into the structure. I see clarity on your proposal, but perhaps it's not translating with enough strength into the materialization, although the ideas that drive them are really clear.
It seems familiar. It seems like similar to the conversation we had in Charlie's about this kind of ambiguity about how light is the touch, or if the building's embedded. And so that relationship perhaps needs to be less ambiguous. For instance, I'm thinking of the Hirshhorn Museum in DC, where you actually enter under the circle, and then there's a space within the center and a connection, well, it's on a street, it's in, an urban condition, but still the site passes under the building, and that allows you into the building, and it builds these relationships, both with the larger context of the site, but then it has this really intimate, specific space to the building itself. If it got a little bigger, like Margarita was saying, so that the center is actually a place, but perhaps you really need to really not touch the building with the outside circumference of the circle, but you maybe enter in the middle.
Understood. Thank you.
I think this has to do, we talked about scale in the previous project. I think also this has to do, with scale in a different way, I think. So I agree that I think some elements are maybe too small, the void in the center, or maybe even the way in which the cafe extends out. Because right now it seems that is a quite, almost even though, your intentions are the opposite, because you start really looking at the building as a viewing device into the landscape that is actually segmented into how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 or 8 moments, right? So that's the question, whether it's a circle or is segmented into these parts. And so this, I think, to me, this diagram that you have at the beginning, it's key to understand how the project might evolve. Because I think your project operates, at 2, 3 levels. On the one hand, it's a pretty internalized condition, meaning that really from inside, you enter, you experience, and you see these key moments within the landscape. So the shaft and the sinkhole. And so I think there is a relationship between how far these objects are and how you begin to calibrate the scale of the building as well. Because I think so there are 2 things. I think these selected moments inside the building itself. So what do I see, where I am, and what is the relationship between the landscape and this object within the landscape? And the second one, I think, has to do with movement, because your project really talks about the spiral movement up and down. And so I'm glad you talked about that the roof, actually, you can walk on it and reach the top. But the same spiral movement also happens inside the building, even though it's flat. So maybe I think it's a possibility for you to begin to see how these 2 relationships work in section. Perhaps the floor, right now everything coexists in terms of program. So I enter, and I exit exactly at the same point. But what if I start to change, the entry and the starting point and the end point at the plan level, because you only have one floors right now, and then automatically they start to shift some of the moments also in the roof. And because it seems to me the experience from inside is quite the same, even though you're trying to break down this view into multiple parts. But when I enter, because of the scale of the building, that it's small, I see everything at the same time. So the question to you, how you define the procession in order to perhaps at some point see everything at the same time, but also do the opposite, be able to only see certain things in a very selective spatial condition, which right now is not happening. So it's pretty much the same, right? I enter, I see everything, I exit, and then maybe I can go up to the roof and it's exactly the same thing because I see everything 360. So there is not really differentiation between a more, let's say, individualized condition of viewing the site versus the collective. And so this, I think, could really benefit your project in terms of establishing some sectional relationship between the way in which you move around into these 9 segments, but perhaps from inside also you connect to the roof as well. And I think really has to do with the spiral movement. So maybe as you go up, you start to go down at the same point. It starts not necessarily at complexity, but really the double loop from going up to down and down, from ground to the top and then from the top down. And that, to me, that's really the key, because you're trying to define moments of compression and expansion, because if you look at your model, it's not the same sectionally, but the change, the variation is very small. So I'm questioning how this variation really operates within the larger landscape, which is vast in relation to the sculpture piece that you're trying to develop.
Yes, thank you. That's very helpful.
In that direction, I think I totally agree with Marcela in the sense of making it bigger and using the sectional, and perhaps even framing the views like a clock with walls that are going up in a way that frame the places, and again, like echoing that outside to make that this architectural intervention that's almost land art.
I think there's really, you set yourself up with 2 tools. There's a concentric aspect and there's a radial aspect, and you see the kind of there's a bit of an awkwardness in the way the segments occur within the circle. But I think you could play up both of those and maybe choose where you integrate them and choose where you don't, or preference one or the other. And it seems I think there's a landscape critique that some of these peripheral sinkhole mineshaft sites, you reference a view, which is a little bit ambiguous. And maybe the denial of connection is part of your idea, but I think there's a landscape approach that might integrate those in a clearer way, as well as help solve your front door problem a little bit. I think in your mind how you get in, but it's hard to tell from the site itself. But I think there's a question about the program inside as well, and the way that you sequence, sort of like what Marcelo was just saying, sequencing different ways to circulate inside, or Professor Yover's comment about adding walls, something to preference those frames that you describe and the view, and maybe and choose where you're supposed to experience the continuity and the frame, because I think they're fundamentally quite different. It's moments within a system, and I think you need to set up both the moment and the system.
Okay. Thank you all. That was very helpful. Great feedback. Thank you.
Just a last comment in that sense, that the bathrooms will be in another position, no? Because they either belong to the radial and are inside a wall, but they will never be in the frame, no? Like in the place of a window. So I think it's important to, when you have this scheme or partie, to decide where are the opaque things and where are the open things, spaces. Now, for example, this box here, the bathroom here, maybe either on the center if it's opaque, or in the radial condition that is also opaque, but never in this kind of window.
I think these are offices. They look like bathrooms, though.
They shouldn't. Well, perhaps
Maybe they're not.
they are, but I actually flipped those back and forth quite a few times. So
are they offices or bathrooms?
Are behind the stairs. They're almost underneath the stairs, sort of hidden.
Okay.
But they're there. But yes, that's helpful. And I at one point had the program pushed out, but I kept just thinking it sort of was wasting that exterior space. But I agree that, creating movement is important as a view. So I'll think about that in the future. Thank you.
Well, I think you have arrived at a solid point, but it was a long process. I mean, this idea of being more selective about the views that are offered through the geometry of the building or through internal arrangements, I think what was suggested several times in the course of the process. So, and I think it's a useful suggestion, right? Rather than assuming that the 360 degree like the answer in a way. I think it's more interesting, right? Or more, it offers more complexity in regards to how you experience the building, right? If you really like base the strategy on these opportunities, right? Of directing views, of allowing views or not allowing views, right? Which I think just offers more like tension and dynamics in regards to the inhabitation of the building. And then secondly, I do think the comments in regards to the tightness of it are spot on. I think with all the site and the context that is available at your disposal, right? It's very sculptural and compressed at this point, and allowing it to breathe and open up, also in regards to the courtyard, in regards to approach and sequencing through, I think is a useful comment that you could think about if you wanted to push this design further, right? Or keep on thinking about it.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ellen. Excellent. Let me erase this stuff. Great. Next, we have Bailey.
Yeah.
Bailey, where are you, left or right?
One over to the right.
To the right. There you are. I see it.
All right.
Okay, great.
Everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. There's just construction outside that makes me think I'm experiencing an earthquake. So, hi, I'm Bailey. Thank you all for being here. When we first visited this site, I was struck by the juxtaposition of the two sites. We really visited two sites on the island. We were taken through the really nice gardens of the Jefferson Island estate, the Rip Van Winkle Gardens. We followed these very defined paths. We looked at very specific things. There were peacocks around the gardens. They're very beautiful. And then we gradually moved up around the hillside at the very top towards the abandoned salt mine complex, which it became very wild, unkempt, and dead at times, with very motley trees and grasses just proliferating where they could. But the method of approach really dictates how you come to interpret this site. So from these images here at the bottom left and right, respectively, you can see how coming to the site from the water's edge, you really get none of that impression. It's all very manicured, very well kept. But if you come from the top, you really feel that difference, and it kind of inspires curiosity about what really happened here, because there really is no information signage other than what your tour guide might tell you. So I thought by placing my proposal in the site, in the hillside, excuse me. If we look at my diagrammatic site plan below there, I can pull together the two different experiences and really mix the innocence of the procession by the water's edge and the curiosity and even confusion from coming from the edge of the salt mine complex. So by organizing program in, the most associated realms of leisure and more serious exhibition space and mixing them together, I could create a cohesive proposal that would allow for people to discover the most that they can about the site through exhibition space, archive artifacts, and see different views and perspectives and things. So in my Part T suggestion, I moved from kind of an underground intervention to a more raised columnar proposal. However, what I ended up going with was kind of a mix of the two. If we can go to my axon on the second column, please. Where by embedding the project at the point, because the topography slopes as such that it reaches a peak right at the edge of the abandoned salt mine complex, by placing an entrance at that point and by placing an entrance at the, a gentle walk up the lakeside level, then getting those two people in at these different levels will keep their narratives consistent, but there'll be these vertical circulation columns that allow them to mix and experience different things, see different views. So here's the placement on the site and the cut through section down below where we could visualize the exact topographic slope, the piers further down to the right, and the peninsula behind. So if we move up to the site plans, we can start at the first floor level on the far right, or far left, excuse me. So by coming in this entrance at the stairs, this floor plan is left entirely open without really any definitive programmatic elements, because in order to really explore the site, you have to commit. You have to commit to exploring this building. And when you do, then the whole history, the culture, and its future potential really opens up. So from these 2 points of vertical circulation organized on this 3x3 grid, we can go underground to explore the salt mine exhibits in the underground level on the next one over, that one, with which features the salt mine cart, the hoist cage in a lowered compressed ceiling environment, and then it opens up expansively into the salt wall, which kind of concludes the procession of the salt mine exhibit portion of the proposal. And then, but if you choose to move upwards, you could go to the cafe level. There's an Audubon exhibit with the more generic kind of open floor plan kind of lobby space where you could more freely explore. And you have these different views at the top of the stairs, which show you selected perspectives and portions of the site. You never get the whole picture until you ascend to the third level, which has this open roof plan. And then you can explore the disaster archive and the video room and see any perspective of the site that you so choose. So from going to the most closed off portion of the proposal in terms of view to the most expansive, that's how you get the most out of the site. And so here we can see that in the section perspectives, the drop ceiling in the underground level, the different kinds of vertical circulation to interact with, and finally the roof level, which gives you all these different kinds of views. Here we can move to the left to the transverse section. The building is covered in in white concrete with an aluminum anodized mesh, which will cover certain windows that will render the building different with a different appearance in daytime as there is in nighttime. If we can move to the renders down below, please. So here in the exterior render, you can see the views most obvious at night, which all shine through the mesh screen that won't be visible in the daytime. And then here is the second floor interior level where you can see selected views opening out to the whole site that will become more clear as you move throughout the building. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bailey.
Thank you very much. I will start again. I really am fascinated by the way how you actually deal with the topography or the existing site. Maybe you can fill me in a little bit. There's a couple of models on the left-hand side, and there's one that I'm super fascinated with. It's the one in the middle. It shows very complex geometries, very different cubes put together. I also like the one on the right-hand side where it shows like the kind of basement or whatever you experimented with there. And when I looked at this model, I had the feeling that you're also describing this very complex path through the building, but always towards the water. And then I was very confused to see that you basically take a left turn very often. You don't ever go straight, or you're meandering. So maybe you can say a little bit about the path through the building, because from your explanation, it's all about having views and experiencing different views and so on.
Yes, of course. Would you mind going to the longitudinal perspective section, Cortilla? So that's a really good point. I kind of struggled with the placement in the topography at first. The underground level was first located all the way to the right to kind of have more programmatic consistency across the three, we can call them blocks of program. But by integrating them into the two different approaches, it kind of becomes a cohesive form that you have to interact with every single part of it, as opposed to just keeping with your own unique narrative. So when I first conceived of this proposal, I had first thought of a 3x3 grid that I then extended 4 levels down below. And then by playing with subtractive processes, I came to these interesting extrusions of vertical circulation and horizontal circulation. So by placing the pieces of program here, the design essentially pulls you through the horizontal planes to help you access these different parts of program, but only so much as the visitor chooses to commit to do so. And that's that part of the meandering that I really wanted to emphasize, which is why the floor plan is entirely open on the first floor level. So if the visitor wishes to do so, they can learn more, they can glean a better understanding, they can attain a deeper perspective and enlightenment about the site and its history, because it is very rich. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. It's so confusing because you sort of lose complexity from this first model where you have all these different elements. Then you show the rendering with the different cutouts. You basically have these small cutouts, and it looks really nice in the night view. But somehow I would have the feeling that because you're, putting this cantilever out there, that there should be a more defined path, or the path should be more architecturally defined to stand out. But that's just me. I'm sure there's plenty of other opinions. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent.
In my view, this is really precise and intentional proposal that where, first of all, the content of the exposition and the form of the building are really tied together. They are really coherent and cohesive, I think. And you can tell that you have a architectural thinking. And so the description of the building is really precise in terms of narrative or literary, in the literary world, but also you can tell that you explain and feel the building as an architect. So I think that's really, commendable. In my view, if I can see this section perspective, that to respond somehow to the question that is posed by Ruth, I think there is something about the way, in my view, that you, I don't know if I can draw again, these volumes that are sitting in the floor plan that articulate the movement from one level to another, this kind of per se vertical. I think that they are strong, but maybe they can be even stronger in the way they guide the movement from one place to another, because you have a sectional possibility. You know, when you're here, you see that one. I think maybe if the building is able to allow views in section, or more intentional views in section between one vertical thing and the other, not only in plan, that perhaps will strengthen the guidance of people from one level to another. So it's not only like vertical and sectional, but is in diagonal as well. No? So that the views, if you're standing in one place, you can view the other one or view the other one. Are you guiding this or not? How can you make it? No? The transition between plan and section, I think, will be a way of strengthening. And that might be, looking at the plan, it can be a way of twisting some of the walls, or controlling the views of this promenade from one level to another.
Or perhaps even dropping some of the ceilings and kind of playing with vertical, the greater access like that. That's true. That's
right. Yeah. But I think it's really complex and delicate. Congratulations. Really fun.
Well, thanks, Billy.
I don't know how to erase. I would erase.
I'll erase for you.
Thank you.
I think it's a very competent building, and I think it shows the competent in a good way, in the sense that I think it shows somehow the, a clear scaling of the program, scale within the site, etc. I'm interested in two aspects of your project that perhaps could be, further developed or as a potential. So, when I saw the night render and some of the study, I think your project start to operate on two levels. You can enter from below, but also you can enter from above. And I think the fact that you enter from below, so the site right now slopes down, so you entering the building from below, I think it's a quite powerful aspect, in the sense, of course, you can exit as well. But when you enter, basically, because of the fact that the building is now floating on the one hand towards the water, you are compressed from what's above. And as you enter, you begin to discover the program and enter the different galleries, etc. But from above, you see mostly, you can inhabit the roof. And so on the top, you acknowledge more the kind of planar condition of the site, and from below the kind of the sectional condition. I think this is an opportunity for perhaps further developing the meeting of these two surfaces. So what I've been thinking since you presented, since the beginning, it would be because the section right now is pretty it's based on really stacking of program. But there is no any type of sloping perhaps within the site itself that start to engage the section of the given site. So maybe I cannot draw, let me see if I can, but perhaps this sloping of the surface going down into the water maybe start to become more operational within the building itself, that actually start to curve and then go back into annotate, yes, and start to do that. And here, right, that right now it's the building is that, but what if these start to actually operate? I mean, of course, it goes back to the ground, but it start to really enter the site much more. Right. Let me clean it here. So this condition. So you enter from below, but also you go from above. And I think that can perhaps start to even open up this more towards the water, having this mass floating above.
Yeah.
So I think the meeting of these two aspects could be quite fascinating from the way in which you start to engage the site, because one, I think there is one aspect that, again, the building, it's quite defined right now. So there's a very precise, not precise location, but it's quite defined within the landscape. I'm wondering where perhaps there are moments to blur a little bit more the boundaries between the interior program and the landscape. So for instance, I think, maybe the building start to expand this grid, this invisible grid into the landscape. And this could be further ways to begin to look at the building this way, but also sectioning in this way. So I'm wondering if there is some extension from inside to the outside, and this is the same logic of the surface that can go beyond the existing envelope right now. Because I think this is quite, it works, I think, as a building, but my question to you is how the building really can operate even more as a device to engage the landscape. Where I think right now that the envelope, it's sort of setting, even though at night, I think it glows and we can see this is a kind of an object, but I'm talking more about the negotiation with the nature and versus the man-made. That right now, to me, that the edge is quite strong. Besides the fact that you have views that you look outside, etc., or the content of your project, the exhibition itself, but where perhaps we start to blur the boundaries, maybe a little bit more between the landscape and the project. Maybe it could be some semi-open spaces, right, that start to enter the building in some ways.
Right, because it's very contained right now.
Yes.
Yes, I see that. That's a good point.
I think you've done a great job in plan transforming the simplicity of those three in your program diagram, the three program boxes into this kind of Tetris box. You can still read those three boxes in plan I guess it's kind of the hilltop level plan, but above and below it breaks down in a nice way, and I think it does start to suggest that diagonal that Professor Yubera was talking about. But I think you could elaborate the section in a similar way. You lose the sense of those three boxes and their relationship and complexity in the section. It's still there a bit latent in a latent way in those in the glass prisms. There's three of them. Your eye tracks between them. But whether it's changing the floor to floor heights or doing something to indicate there's still an echo of three programmatic volumes in this section, I think maybe starts to also open up some of those landscape connections. Then you're moving out beyond before and after just the three.
Right, that's a good point.
And one other thing, I think your photo collage also is quite nice, and suggests sort of a stratification. I think there's a really clear sky, canopy, trunk, and then like 2/3 of the drawing is earth and water. And maybe that's something that you could also explore. There's a sense in your building spatially of being in the canopy. The hilltop level is the kind of piano nobile, the primary floor.
Yeah.
And so what does it mean experientially to move down below the canopy or above it or into the earth? You're starting to do that, but it's really clear in that photo collage, and maybe something to pick up on in your renderings or perspectives. That sense of being in the canopy or above and below.
Right. More, yeah, that sense. It's true. Cool.
Right. I think that's really great commentary. Bailey, I really love that you included these kind of progress models. They really explain the progression towards the resolution of the project really well. And, there's a lot to be said about that center study model. We already picked up on that in the midterm review. And, looking at your final model, I do believe you managed to maintain most of the complexity, although I would still argue that the center study model is still really fascinating to me. But it kind of morphed into a project on its own from there, I think, and while certain things were simplified, I think other things were gained. So, and I think overall, this is a really convincing presentation. So good job.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for all your comments.
Thank you. Should we take a quick 2-minute break? I know Ruth has to leave and Marianne already had to leave. She could only join us from 1 to 3. Should we take a quick 2-minute break and then review the second half? Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Bye, everybody. Great work.
Thank you, Ruth.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice to see you again, Marcella. And
Bye. Good to see you.
Have a great night, a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Ciao, ciao.
All right. Everybody got a chance to get something to drink, refresh. Taylor is refreshed already. Okay, Taylor, you want to get started?
Sure.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Taylor Cleveland, and for this proposal, I began with the things that really stuck out to me during our research and during our site visit. And those things were the changes in the topography, both naturally and from man-caused events, and the marks of those interactions and the remnants of the things that have happened on that site. And especially just the emphasis everyone kept putting on this hill that was there, being just within the context of how flat Louisiana is. And so going down to my site analysis drawings, you can see the exploration of those things and looking at the sinkhole and the contours of the island, and down at the lower analysis, kind of those outlines of what used to be on this site, and the impact on the vegetation of the site. And then down in my collage at the bottom, I took that a step further and just kind of looking at what's on the site, kind of this, very much this feeling of history of things that were there and are there, but you're kind of a vague sense of not knowing what those things are that you get when you're there. And so was the main basis of my of this proposal. So in looking at the very top, the site photos, those were a big part. Here you see a remnant building of the mine operations, the piers peeking out of the water, as well as that chimney that Carrie also showed us earlier. And then also was very impactful to me during the research was seeing that room and pillar design that was used in the mine shaft, and how large and cavernous those spaces were. And so jumping back to my parties, the design was based mainly on that, and in creating these layers of spaces that engaged in, on, above, and under the landscape, and using light to differentiate these spaces and call back to the things you see on the site, the things you do not see on the site, as well as those layers of the mine operations and layers of the salt dome that we learned so much about. Moving over to the proposal plan, you can see here on the site plan, I chose the hillside, not quite the hilltop, because I did want to place emphasis on the small amount of elevation that is there. And in that section, you can see I have placed the building below ground, within the ground, and above the ground. So beginning with the highest level of this proposal, that is the cafe space, and that space sits on top of the ground level, giving you opportunities to look out to the north, east, and west of the site, as well as going out onto that lobby rooftop for seating. Then on the ground level is, again, that lobby space that with the channel glass walls that allow you to look to the lake and the pier remnants to the west and to the lakeside, and also seeing the former site of the mining operations to the north. From there, you can either take the elevator down to various levels or take the stairs down into what I am calling the third level, but actually here on the left side are levels 3, 4, and 5, where various areas that have been offset at different heights to again give you the sense of descending further and further into the ground. And this is where my auxiliary spaces, reading rooms are. And then at the very lowest level are the gallery spaces. And these are the spaces that have called back to those mining areas and those large cavernous spaces, where it is a very long linear space with very high walls that holds all of the exhibition areas. And then moving over to the exterior perspective, again, you can see in this view from the water how those different spaces and various levels of programming are coming out of the ground at different spots. And as my colleagues have mentioned, those approaches from the waterfront and from the hillside, it's meant to kind of grab you and intrigue visitors and want them to venture up to what was the more barren area of the site, and to intrigue them with what's going on further below what the naked eye can see. And in these interior perspectives, you are seeing, again, that play on light where this lobby area is mostly glass and you can get those views out to the water and out to other, the sites of the island, versus the much darker gallery space with its much higher walls and exhibition spaces. So that is my proposal. Look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Taylor.
Can you describe, this is beautiful, by the way, I'm really intrigued by this. Can you describe the scalloped shapes in the plan, where those came from? Kind of oppositional form to the...
So that is where those levels of the building are coming out of the landscape. I have emphasized the elevation change a bit. This proposal is there will be some addition, because of course there's some excavation in order to get the building in the ground, but just layering that ground up a little bit more, and that is just ground cover over the rest of those roof buildings.
If I understand well, you're saying that it's almost like a building before being sunken into the ground. It has its mark in the landscape? Or...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so these areas peek out of those, following kind of the contours of the landscape. They're peeking out those edges.
But it's almost like the volume was here and then you push it down the ground, and that's a mark that is living in the... So is that building, for example, sunken now, but it has its roof mark at the land, or?
The question is, are the volumes extending all the way to the ground, or is it just kind of an imprint that you designed to?
Yeah.
Taylor?
They're within the ground.
And what do you see here on the ground floor, on the cafe, let's say on the cafe level? The imprints that you see, are those the true roofs of the building?
That's the roofs of the building. Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
think this is a very important question somehow, because to me, your project, it's about this delicate tension between the exposed surface and the programs that start to emerge from the ground. So in other words, I think, there are two things here. One is the strata that really operate as these sets of programs that are stuck on top of each other, and some are below ground, some are above ground. So on the one hand, I think you have the narrative of the strata that are able to not only look at the kind of geological history of the site, but connect back to the history, metaphorically or not. And so I think there is an engagement of the narrative in the way in which the project operates. Then I think the second level, it's the relationship between what's above and what's below, but also the registration of what's below onto the surface of the landscape. So I'm thinking at the early Emilio Ambas project from the 70s or the 80s, where basically, 90%, even public buildings, right? Most of the program, it's underground, but what emerged above ground, it's a trace or it's a reference point within the landscape to help the public, let's say, orient within the landscape to see what's above. And as you said, trigger the curiosity of actually moving from what's above to what's below. And so I think this project talks about that a little bit. The relationship between not only what's above and what's below, but how also the building has a field, potentially a field of objects that emerge from the landscape that register what's below. But it's not only what register what's below, they're actually attractors point for the collective, let's say, for the people that are experiencing the landscape to really want to go underground. Yeah. And so to me, it talks about this notion of strata, geological time of the site, but also partially ruins that start to emerge. So all of this, I think, is quite elegant within your project. So that, I think, is quite strong within the way in which the project is set up, within the way in which now the programs and not the program is distributed, but also how each layer operates. I have then specific questions about what happens in the lowest point of your building here. Let me annotate right here. So I guess this is completely dark, right? Yes.
Not completely dark. So there are two skylights as well as interior lights inside, yes.
Yeah. So there is, I think the light is really the third component, right? On the one hand, it's really the strata, again, repeating myself, but on the second one is the emergence of some of the objects above ground. And the third one is the how the lights start to operate in section. And so I think some of these spaces, could be, I think you have a view. Do you have a view from this gallery?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and it seems that there is right here. Okay. Yeah, great. So it's, we see it's quite light there. But so I think, it's quite elegant project, and I think there is a lot of potential, and now it really is weaving together, I think, a lot of things both from the program distribution to the metaphor to the way in which the landscape starts to be engaged.
Thank you.
I just got those scalloped shapes. I get it now. I think there's something so elegant in the way that those forms interact with the geometry, the orthogonal geometry. And I think you've already started to extend that into the landscape, the way you approach the building from the hilltop. You have a couple of site walls with a little bit of almost Corbusian geometry. And I think there's just a really nice formal language that you've developed. And I almost wonder how you could leverage those scallop shapes a little bit more without going too far, like without really messing up these formal cubes, because there's a purity to it, kind of the cubic anthill, an ant below the ground. But I just love the way the curve is introduced. And I think, not to get too practical about this, but with an underground project, the way that, in terms of constructability, you're going to dig a huge hole and go down as far as you need to go, which I think is really effective for the experience of the gallery, by the way, putting that at the bottom. It's kind of like a World Trade Center Museum or National African American Museum, the core galleries at the deepest point. But I wonder how you make use of the dirt in between, because most likely they wouldn't fill back in the dirt over the thing they built, and then so it's going to be constructed in a big hole. And so
I don't reuse a lot. Sorry to interrupt you. I don't reuse a lot of it, but I do reuse some of it to help in getting those middle layers covered and to kind of build up that elevation a little more to the south side of the building. So that kind of was my thought, but I know I'm definitely not. There's still a lot left over, but
I mean more like the intermediate level right above the gallery roof.
Okay.
So what is there a way that you could? Right, exactly. Is there a way that you could use that space in a productive way, since you're going to be excavating anyway, without compromising the feeling of the diagram and the experience? So it's sort of a graphic challenge, but an experiential challenge too.
Okay, yeah.
I found really inspiring the love bombing of Andy in relation to the curves, and it feels that when a building is emerging or a person is emerging from a pool, with the head is like that way into the surface, there's a series of waves that expand from that action. The waves. I wonder if these waves can, the waves that are the echoes of that can inform more about the outside of the project. So because there's this tension between submerged and emerging that might be used formally for the outside organization, or even some cuts into the building, but always thinking about the tension of almost like the action of going up and down. And then in terms of the section that you just showed before, the fascination you have about the light from the image of the recognition of these mines, I think there is a lot of potential to use that echoes of natural light into this piece of the project more. That can be part of the project. Even it's almost that you recognize as earth, but it's a building. It's part of the building that is earth. In a way, instead of feeling earth back and saying, oh, that's not my building, but using that as part of your building, or as a void, or as a darkness, even if it's outside the building, but it's below the earth. It's an outdoor inside the earth.
Okay.
It's in a way, I kind of see an echo of your project in one of the very first drawings about the topography, kind of the, what is it called here? Changing topography, contours, and waterways. Where you have the sinkhole topography overlaid with the former shoreline, and there's sort of a way that the geometry of those contours are interacting and crossing. That I don't know. I see an echo in this kind of scallop versus orthogonal of your project. And but it makes me think that maybe your project is so much about datums and what's occurring above and below, that I wonder if there's a way that you can give more meaning to the depth. And for example, could one of the floor levels of the gallery occur at the same elevation as the lake, or at the same elevation as the sinkhole, or could there? So you might layer on additional meaning to this project that you're excavating anyway, and maybe it goes to the height of the roof of the cafe, to something above the height of the oil derrick, or but you've got all of these datums that may, I don't know how you might experience that besides just knowing in your head, but it seems productive somehow. I think this is a really strong interrogation of the vertical.
I think that's a great suggestion. I feel like, I've talked about this maybe with some others on their projects, but I think specifically here, this is a very useful suggestion, at least, to build that into your construct or your concept of your sectional organization, right? What are the relational lines that emerge from the context that are translated into an understanding of the height relationships within the building?
Mm-hmm.
And then, that in reality, that's something that could be indicated when you occupy the building, right? So you experience the depth, through actually being there, but then also, kind of, intellectually, through the references that are suggested.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good suggestion. And I think these little diagram, these little model, 3D illustrations are also really helpful, actually, to understand the complexity of the building underground, but also how it inserts itself into the landscape. Okay, great. Any other comments for Taylor? And I agree on that space in between. I think we talked about that a few times already. Like just because you're digging in doesn't mean you're not excavating a large portion of the site, and then since you're refilling, right, what can happen or what can become of that space in between. So make that experiential or occupiable, I think, is a really interesting suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank y'all.
Yeah, datum and strata are two really powerful words. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. You could explore that further and see what that means, or how that could be applied more directly here.
Just one other thing, I think it's a really, I appreciate how you've cited the building just below the hilltop. I think it's a clear intention that you don't mean to engage the top, and you don't mean to engage the water, but you're really rooted in that spot. I don't know, somehow it feels right. It's just offset from the key elements, engaging them by view, without I don't know, being heavy-handed about it. Just feels like a nuanced a site location there in the trees and topography.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Taylor, and thank you for the comments. We're going to segue to Elliot. If I can move this concept board. There's so many drawings on here. It's a little jerky. Okay, here we go. Getting closer. There you go. Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Elliot, and I wanted to thank everyone again, especially to all of our jurors who have taken the time out of their busy schedules to be here to view and critique our work. As has been discussed throughout the afternoon, the circumstances that exist on and underneath Jefferson Island are very unique to the state of Louisiana. The distinctive topography that is developed directly as a result of the presence of the underground salt dome, while not terribly exciting, is still rather significant to the overwhelmingly flat region of southern Louisiana. The dual impact the salt dome has had on both above and below ground at Jefferson Island is what initially drew my interest as I was working on a concept for this project. And the site chosen works to engage with both the steepness of the topography as well as two major ecological points of interest on the site, the hilltop and the lakeside. The peak of Jefferson Island and the shores of Lake Peigneur act as anchor points for this project, and the placement of the structure at one of the steeper areas on the island allows this project to communicate with the topography in multiple ways. This proposal of an educational center and Jefferson Island Historical Museum seeks to connect these two anchor points on the site by creating two masses that are connected via an open air staircase that will bring visitors from atop the hill into the hillside and out onto the lake's shore. The experience of this space is highlighted by 2 courtyards that are surrounded by the program of the Education Center. As visitors enter the space at the top of the hill, they first encounter the more specific and introductory areas of the lobby, the reading room, and the video exhibition area. The lobby allows for a northwest view out over the hillside, and then it leads visitors into the first courtyard, which is flanked by the video exhibition space and the archive reading room. This more formally structured sequence then circulates visitors down the open stair corridor and embeds them into the landscape where the program loosens. The gallery space is split by the second courtyard and anchored by the cafe, and visitors are encouraged to freely circulate through these more open elements. Finally, the cafe and associated porch and outdoor classroom provide sweeping views of Lake Penior and Jefferson Island, as visitors now find themselves at the bottom of the hill out on the lakefront. In experiencing the space, the main programmatic elements face inwards towards the 2 courtyards and purposefully exclude views of the landscape. The encounters with the site occur at 3 main points throughout the circulation sequence: the beginning at the hilltop, the middle as you are embedded into the hillside, and at the end once you are released out onto the lakefront. The site axonometric works to clarify the strategy by showing the interior versus exterior spatial relationships created by the 2 courtyards and surrounding programmatic elements. This drawing and its associated model photographs also communicate the overall strategy of creating 2 masses with a single connection that actively engages with the site. As the program relates to the landscape, the relationship between the building and the ground can be seen in the section and section perspective drawings. This relationship emphasizes the steepness of the terrain and the implication of the impact that the topography has on the building. And finally, the renderings and more atmospheric model photographs at the end work to express the materiality of the project as well as the spatial experience one has at different moments while inside the space, as well as from the site that the structure is situated upon. The decision to set the project back from the lake allows visitors to take in views of the lake, the hillside, and the education center simultaneously. Overall, this project works to not only respect the landscape which it sits upon, but also create a relationship between the built environment and the natural beauty that is now found on Jefferson Island. So thank you, and I'm happy to field all questions, critiques, comments, anything you might have for me.
Thank you, Elliot.
Thanks, Elliot. I think your party is quite clear, and also how the building is operating within the landscape. So you're really taking advantage of is this the steepest part of the site overall? Is it?
More or less, it's the steepest part. It's the steepest.
More or less, okay.
Yeah.
Good. Otherwise, I say, okay, move the building in the steepest part. But I think, so I think this is, in a way, deciding is key for this project. And I mean, for all the projects, but in particular here, that in a way, the section start to become your promenade and your procession back and forth between the 2 anchors point that you have. So to me, the building almost works. There is not a particular directionality, even though, you move from the top to the bottom and you look at the water. But at the same time, I think your building, because of the way in which now the 2 anchors work and the connection works, it's almost, it really, the kind of experiential condition is really triggered by moving back and forth from the site to the water and from the water to the site. So both of them are point to me of departure and arrival. And I think this can be seen clearly. I mean, appreciate, and I think the views that you have at the bottom where you actually see the interstitial space in between and from top and the rendering, right? From top on the bottom, it starts to talk about this exchange between the views from the water up to the site and vice versa. Yes, and also the fact that as you move up, you start to see, you move from the water up, you are kind of embedded within the site and you see the upper part of the program, but also appreciate that when you move down, the anchor, so you really have an overlap of views, which is the water behind, but also you start to see the water through these openings that connect back to the path. So I think at the experiential level is quite strong. And so I'm wondering also how far maybe this building could extend even more within the landscape. And I think you start to do that through this. So let me annotate here. You start to do this through this. I'm glad you did that because that's really what I was hoping to see, this extension of outdoor space. This is an outdoor space, right?
Yes.
Into the
correct.
water.
That's correct.
But almost I want to extend it even more and really floating into the water and be really this really extended surface that I'm able to start to see 270, not 360, but almost.
Okay.
And then begin to see this path back here and maybe begin to engage even more within the site. So I think that's the from open to enclose to open again to enclosed again to open. And the procession again is not only encountering the program along the site, but really changing this condition from being outside to being inside, even though these are two, more programmatic indoor condition. And then I think there is the second layer in your project, which is not only the directionality that we see here, but also the split of some of the views that start to generate another way of navigating through the site. So on the one hand, we move from top to bottom in this direction, but also the fact that these buildings, these parts of the building, these programs are oriented in a different way. You start to define frame views into particular section within the site. So I think these two are calibrated quite well within the project. So the more kind of selected views and the more linear condition of movement, top, from the top to the bottom and vice versa. Then the last part to me is this. It's if you move a little bit more up here, it's the way in which these masses start to open up to the corner. So in some cases, there is a quite clear relationship between what is solid in terms of facade and when the corners start to open up and look at the view. So almost, I want to see maybe a little bit more, right, to continue to further curate these curated openings within the diagonal condition. I'm talking about this, right? This diagonal condition versus the linear condition of your project.
Sure. Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
I think, well, a couple of things. I think you've got the scale about right. The upper and lower end of the barbells just seem like they're about the right size in the landscape. So I appreciate that. But I think your project really hinges on the path as you described. And, but more specifically, the relationship of your eye and your body above and below the ground surface. And I think in your long section cutting through the path, it almost feels to me like a little too much about code and how many landings you need in a staircase.
I do.
And I think that looks like it got in the way of the experiential nature of what that path could be. It seems like you could choreograph that experience a little better.
Okay.
If you manipulated the rise and run of the stairs, for example, maybe don't think of it like a staircase.
Okay.
And building on some of the other comments about lines, if you can scroll to one of the site models, the first site model photo, I think there's that one at the bottom. I think there's something accidental here in this photo, which is the way the view lines up with the path on the right. And I don't think you intended to do that. I think you were looking at the building when you photographed, and it's a nice photo. But the way that your eye catches the perspective of that other path maybe suggests alternative pathways and alternative lines in the landscape. So there might be a way, whether or not they're intersecting the building directly, to use that idea of long sloped pathways and existing above and below and connecting for some other site moves. And just the last thing I'll say, maybe related to that, is I think you have an awkward lobby, and the sense of arrival seems a little disappointing for what's to come. It's this kind of windy, turny thing, and then you arrive at the line. And I'd almost like it to be choreographed one way or the other, where you enter on axis, or you have a key pivot to acknowledge the length of that move. I mean, it seems like there's just too many twists and turns in there before you understand the main guiding organization of the space.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think part of me wanted to keep it a little hidden, but I guess giving the visitor too many things to do before they really understand it could be a bit distracting. So I understand where you're coming from.
So I think in my view, it's a project that has the virtue of having clarity, but at the same time, sophistication and complexity, meaning that you have a top and a down, a clear direction from top, down, down, top. But I think what is really wise is the introduction of these diagonals, of these views across. That I think is really wise as a counterpoint to something that otherwise is really simple, like up, down, and line. So pushing these diagonals a little bit further, not only on the organization of volumes in plan, but starting to use these also in sections. So in plan, for example, in your stairs, in the promenade towards down, you might have some porch or above, or some breaking down of this wall that allows some views to the landscape or something like that. So something minimal that can occur here. But then if we look at the section in the section of this building through, let me see where it is. Yeah, here. Yeah, the one that has the earth, perhaps, that below that one.
The other one.
So, yeah, sorry. Yeah, here, I think there's something that can also be expanded in terms of the way the roofs are done. So I think the roofing, I know those are boxes right now because boxes follow the horizontal strata. But I think at some point you might want to explore the diagonal also in the section. Okay. To emphasize this either view to the earth or view to the sky. No? So the sectional properties that you're exploring in plan might apply slightly in section as well. Perhaps the volumes have different heights, and also the view allow you some cuts into these volumes. So something to think about, because I think what is clear is the tension between clarity, simplicity, cube, orthogonal, and then complexity, sophistication, diagonal, view, intangible, experiential, etc. So exploding this in different systems, either views or masses or materiality, can strengthen the project, I think.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think I was a little hesitant to do more with the roof just because I shy more on the conservative side, but I think expressing the diagonals would make a lot of sense and connect the section to the plan a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think if you're the guy that takes the practical idea and transforms it, or you have a sense of the practicality, then you'll have a roof slope even if it's a flat roof. So
absolutely,
that's true.
So that's true. That's maybe that's your in. You know, that's you leverage the practicality of it and amp it slightly or use it somehow. And I think that there's also sort of a Michael Heiser quality to cutting in the landscape like this, if you're familiar with the landscape sculptor. And there's one of his most famous works, Double Negative. It's across a canyon, 2 excavations across a canyon. So you're within one, and you look across and see it's equivalent, but you can't reach it. And I think that's maybe an opportunity with a project like this that already has 2 anchor points in a line when you introduce the diagonal, maybe there are other anchor points that you reference, whether or not you can access them physically. It might give a little meaning or anchor the geometry in a different way in the landscape.
Okay.
Could you describe that a little further? What do you mean by that?
Well, I don't understand looking at the project where the angles are coming from. I like them formally, and I agree with the comment that there's a complexity to it that's working well. But maybe they're referencing something explicitly or implicitly elsewhere in the landscape, even if it's a tree or a grove or a gap or some feature like the sinkhole that could be explicated through the gallery or through some other content in the space. But it seems like you've now got the pieces in place, and they could do a little bit more if they're connected in some way.
Okay.
Where do the angles come from, Elliot?
Yeah, the angles one came from just kind of starting with a grid and skewing them a little bit to create that diagonal form, just basically. And then two, if you look at the site, the more zoomed out site plan that's on the bottom left, yeah, that one, they all kind of point towards different areas on the island. So the bottom angle points back at the Jefferson Island house and simultaneously at the salt mining industry, while the right one points just kind of up the hillside and then out onto the peninsula. And then the two anchors point out onto the lake and start at the hillside. So you're kind of right in that they imply all the different points of interest on the site, but I think you're right in that I could make it a little bit more explicit. Or take
there's this lesson in architecture. When you have an angle, you always want to find where is that coming from in a very precise way, especially if it's an urban context. This is not the case because it's more landscape, but just following on that conversation on the idea that this line here might come from a line that exists here, and this line come from a line that exists here. These kind of things, echoes, are typical in a discussion of architecture. You know that. Sure. So you have the first intuition, and then you try to find your cousin on the land. You know, that back up. But just on the side, comment.
Okay,
I think
you could also.
This also has to do with the larger.
Go ahead.
The largest references. I think we Am I muted? No. With the large reference system, I think within the landscape that you start to establish, right? So I think this, and I think all the project, right, is part of a larger reference that it's either what you create for yourself in order to ground the project, or also the start to give very specific point of reference. And I think this idea of extension within the project, that whether right now are more platform-based or program-based, I think could be an interesting way to add a little bit more of not necessarily complexity, but reference within the landscape system.
Okay.
And I know this is an architecture studio, not a landscape studio, but I think there's been a hesitation overall today to transform the landscape and really touch it. It seems like a lot of buildings, sometimes very successfully operating sectionally or within the ground, but about the trees and the kind of sense of space they provide, or the anchor or view they construct. And so this project in particular is so directional. I think there's a real opportunity to think about the planting strategy around the building. The canopy and the ground, and the density of foliage, trunk versus So without going too much down the rabbit hole into landscape, I think you could at least demonstrate an intention. Even in the Axon rendering, the building is so finely crafted with opening and proportion and scale, and the trees seem kind of haphazard.
I guess the attitude is more leaving the trees that are left there instead of creating a completely new landscape. And I think a lot of the research and presentation and even site visit kind of reinforced that allowance to let the site kind of regenerate from the scars of industry that existed there, more so than an attitude of creating a new third landscape from the building. So more kind of respecting the landscape and finding a place that your building fits naturally more so than starting anew. But I completely agree with you in that you could really take advantage and create like a full new experience, both architecturally and then landscape architecturally as well. So,
or even acknowledging what is there in your sections, no? Maybe perhaps so, because in the section where you show the stair, I think in the way you go down, there is something about the recognition of these trees on the side that acts as a canopy that you might, it's already there, you know, for you. So but you're not kind of acknowledging them maybe.
I think the challenge would be to find how few trees you could plant, or how limited your touch could be to still affect the experience.
Sure.
So not necessarily cutting down or replanting, or
yeah.
But how could you intervene with the same kind of finesse that you have sectionally through building and scale in the landscape to accentuate the experience?
Okay.
Great comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Elliot. Very helpful. So I believe Dean Iñaki is joining us for a short period of time, at least I see his photograph.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome. And I think we're gonna segue to Sarah, who is all the way over here. As the critics might have noticed, we're slowly making our way across the island, and we're also slowly making our way from above ground more into the ground. So there's some kind of sequence in the way the projects are sequenced. Okay, Sarah.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Fisher. Thank you for taking the time to be here. This proposal is called Into the Hillside. Jefferson Island's hillside marks the above ground transition between the scars of the old salt mine operation and the beauty of the Rip Van Winkle Gardens. The hill topography, unique to an otherwise flat landscape, hides the old salt mine ruins and debris, as well as the new gas storage infrastructure on the lake from the beautiful and peaceful garden views. If you go beyond the hillside, scars and traces of old and new industrial infrastructure can be seen. However, the driving factor of both this unique topography as well as the area's rich and dramatic history is related to what lies beneath the surface, the salt dome. This project proposal follows the hillside topography created by the salt dome and provides a place for visitors to travel into the hillside to learn about what lies beneath the surface of Jefferson Island. Through exploring the Education Center, visitors will learn what lies directly beneath the beautiful lake view of the project, raising awareness of the consequences of resource extraction, as well as inspiring the drive to learn from the past and recover from prior mistakes. So the proposal was designed to follow the curvature of the hillside. It's embedded into the hillside, requiring excavation, which draws attention to the narrative of underground scars. The site analysis on the right shows the location of the scars of the industrial operations, including the sinkhole on the lake floor and the mine excavations below ground. The photos to the left show the shifting conditions from the gardens to the salt mine ruins. The hillside marks the area between these two conditions. From the site plan, you can further see the positioning of this project facing the lake and sitting between the salt mine ruins to the north and the gardens to the south. It connects to the existing pathways between the areas. The site section shows how the project looks over the water and is inserted into the hillside. And the model below shows the proposal with both the roof and land cover included to the left and removed to the right to allow you to see how the structure fits into and cuts into the land. Where the model ends on the bottom is where the lake begins. And then the axonometric shows the proposal inserted into the hillside and connected to the paths. You can enter from the stairs above or the paths below, allowing movement between the salt mine ruins and the gardens with this proposal in between. There's a series of skylights to bring in additional light to certain rooms, as well as an outdoor classroom on the right side of the structure. This is the roof plan, which further shows the proposal. And below is the floor plan. The entrances bring you into the lobby where you can go towards the cafe and reading room above, or go towards the gallery and exhibition space below. And then to the left, there is a section of the proposal. A bench lines the windowsill on both the inside and outside of the structure. You can walk out onto the roof as well. And the front patios are also embedded into the ground and sit below that ground level. And then the perspectives to the right further show the structure and how it sits within the landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Any comments?
I start. So I think this project, as the previous one, it's quite clear in the sense that we're really able to read the party, and I think there is a clear connection, I think, between the premise, the party, and the way in which the project is developed right now. To me, there are again multiple moments of interest that I think start to organize the program and the relationship with the landscape. That has to do with the duality between the continuity and the fragmentation of the moments that you start to establish. So if you go to the plan, each of the so there are moments where you start to register this individual program and the procession of this individual program opening up to the landscape. But at the same time, there is a continuous spine, so the semicircle that you start to establish, that is able to provide not only the connection, but also the circulation partially between each part of the program. And then I think there is also, and then I think when you go to the outside, there is another moment for the collective to come together as an extended, really the extended space on the outside. So in a way, if you look at the plan, almost it works as this, just looking at this plan specifically, at these parallel zones that work with an intersection between the continuity of the arc with the specific, let me see if I can annotate here, maybe it's better, this continuity here that is provided, I think, on multiple levels to the directionality of the fragmentation of the program that you start to establish and how these start to look into the landscape. And then there is, again, I think, a moment where everything comes together again, which is the outdoor space, where you're able to look out again. This is one level, I think, just to look at the party. The second one is the relationship between the top and the bottom, I think in your case as well, and then the rest of the site. So I'm here and I start to see, I don't really see anything, right? I only see basically the skylight that start to, I think in some similar to some of the other projects that we saw, that I'm able to experience the program from above. And I think in your case as well, I'm wondering how this specific surface could become maybe more operative in the way in which some of the programs start to be registered from above. Not because necessarily the program needs to extrude to the above surface, but perhaps working more with devices like points or retaining walls that start to really mark the the location of the indoor program onto the exterior landscape. So I think that could be, because right now this is what's happening in the project, right? So it's really this line versus this line versus this, and then all the program it's here. But I think that there is an opportunity here to push maybe some of these critical moments of transition in your project onto the landscape on the above surface, this moment here. I'm saying this because I think maybe a second level in which some of these moments can even start to be a little bit more either poché or maybe inhabitable in your project, that right now they're just transition, you know, from one moment to the other one. But maybe these interstitial spaces could become to, could potentially start to have other meanings spatially or experientially. I'm talking about this space in between. I know these are walls right now, right, from program to program, but I think there is a lot to do with this. Let me delete again and redo it. So I think there is a lot to do with this. Both, I think, on this level of the floor plan that we see, but also at this level of how these perhaps start to be registered onto the higher level of the landscape. So I think in your case, similar to Elliot, to the previous one, there is a clarity on your project. And I think the question, what else can be added somehow to start to bring together the spatial quality and the experiential quality, pushing maybe some of these aspects a little bit more into the party that you currently have.
I think your section gets to a little bit to that point of poché, where the roof thickness is unusual. You know, I think you feel that moment of compression coming down the stairs, that narrow, the ceilings over your head, and maybe that's to Marcella's point, something that you could explore in plan too, so disrupt the regularity of the wall thickness, but also the overall facet. You know, maybe some of them are exaggerated to be a bit narrower threshold, and some of them are exaggerated a little wider. But I think I have a bigger question, and it's, this project is trying really hard to be invisible from above, and succeeding, I think, even though you don't have a rendering on the ground from the top. But it makes me wonder why. And without having been to the site, what is it about this particular location that requires invisibility? And is there something else that's overriding some other experience on the site that's so vital to preserve that you go to this length of making your building invisible? And if not in this particular location, is it somewhere else? And I wonder, what makes me wonder what happens if this building drifted down the hillside, you know, closer to the water's edge, or if it moved around on Charles's site or something. You know, where is the critical site that requires invisibility? And is it here? I'm curious, and never having been there.
Yeah, so the invisibility was intentional, and the reasoning behind that was, you know, this project is a huge amount of excavation and a fairly big undertaking and mark on the landscape, but it doesn't look like that when it's finished. It looks, you know, more invisible, and I felt like that really spoke to what I was trying to draw attention to, like in the education center, with having this huge sinkhole and like this giant disaster here. And when you look out, it's just this pretty lake. People are getting buried near it. Like it looks so beautiful, but there's so much going on underneath that you can just kind of cover up. Whereas like if you went into the water, there's all these buildings underneath that are sunk and ships. So it's really drawing attention to kind of the history of the area and making you think about, well, it might look all pretty and clean now, but there's a lot of damage that lies beneath the surface. So I kind of wanted to bring attention to that, where there's this beneath the surface condition and then how it looks from above.
Including the salt mine, one should say as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all quite successful. I'm just wondering if this is actually the best site for that, to execute that idea, or
yeah.
if it needs to engage the mine shaft somehow, or the pier, or you know, somewhere else on the site, perhaps. But I think the concept relates to the site in a really strong way. Maybe the lawn space out front that you've excavated could perform something else a little more, a little better. Maybe a steeper slope, but yeah, but I agree with everything you described.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Can I chip in? It's a very clear project, but if I have to say something, is that you have behaved so well, and you are so nice and so polite that you could maybe be a little bit more clear, because as you are saying, this is very important what you have said. It looks like nothing has happened, but you have done a huge operation, no? And maybe you could take it a little bit further to integrate not only topographically, but actually to integrate it more in the site, because the result of this is a huge horizontal platform in front of your building that right now it's unclear how you use all these. I'm in the section, all this kind of enormous plaza, no? That is really big, and you have not planted. It's a little bit like a lot of leftover from your construction, let's say. So I wonder if you could go and be more radical in the sense of maybe extending the topography and I'm in the plan.
Oh, sorry.
And then the trees going down and making it more part of this kind of side forest in the place, as opposed to this big platform after the excavation of the quarry, let's say, that you have here, no? And maybe then also be a little bit stronger in the entrance, and as Marcela was saying, a little bit stronger in the capture of light, even just for the water in the storm not to get inside your light wells, no? And maybe your arrival to the path is an entire built carpet that goes there, and maybe the entrance is a piece of the stair that turns and starts one place, turns to another, and finds its way inside the slope, a little bit like Álvaro Sisa in the restaurant of Lesa da Palmeira, like somehow like extending your muscles, no? And you're being so polite, no? And so like so just like extracting more things of what your strategy is, no? So in this section there will be a section in which the slope continues and the trees go down, no? Yeah. So you don't have in the end a piece that when you look at the render that is a super realistic render, no? Which has its values and its risks. When you look at it in the frame that I have drawn, this could be almost anywhere, no? Because you have cut the hill and then created a new piece, no? So in a way that just which will be the operation, so your building is reconstructing the hill somehow again, no?
Yeah.
In a more radical way, no? But and then maybe try to avoid this kind of dialectic in between what is my architectural moves or topographic moves or whatever, and what is the kind of casual path that does like this kind of strange forms and all that stuff. It's like, oh, when I am out there, I pretend that I'm not doing anything. So it's supposed to be, if I do something curvy, it's like if it was there. We don't do anything curvy. we just say, go to the bulldozer and say, go there. Then when you arrive to that point, turn around and then come back again. And I'm going to tell you to do that thing so we have a good slope, etc. No? But it's not such thing like, oh, I will not compromise and let something curvy be like if I have nothing to do with it. So just like, boom, no, don't be afraid of punching.
And can I see the plan? So many things I don't want to repeat, but I think there is something really special in the way you take the stair and go down. You know, that path here. And then you have a series of light wells that are on top of the back end of the building. To me, this going down and then moving all the way through the facade, it's perhaps a missed opportunity in the sense that once you're here down the stair, you only can move this way. No? You have lost this possibility of entering underneath and seeing the view. No? And I wonder if that moment can be repeated several times. So if you can have the possibility of multi-entrance in that direction, instead of having one, having 2, 3, and 4. And that would be that the series of light wells, instead of being inside the building, they're actually at the retaining wall of those. No? That they provide light to the, so in yellow, well, I cannot change the color anyway. So that moment of the light well, if the light well is behind the retaining wall, it can provide light, but it can also provide an alternative path from 1 to 3 to 2 to, you know, a circulation at the back that allow you to choose where you enter into that moment, 1 to 2, 1 to 3, or 1 to 4. No, that way the entrance is more diverse, and you can meander from north to south at the back of the building.
Yeah, those are great comments. It's funny because it's not the first time that they're coming up. Sarah, we had, you know, the back spine with an alternative path to entering the building has been discussed, right? And then also Sarah actually already reduced the excavation, the flat area in the front quite significantly. It's still very legible, but it was bigger than it is now. So you're making the you know, the steps in the right direction, but it's, you know, like these comments were made commented on at midterm already. So it's interesting that it's being brought up again. But yeah, those are great suggestions. You know, I agree on. I mean, the decision was made to make this building invisible for like the reasons that Sarah put forward eloquently. But, you know, at the same time, I think, you know, like creating, you know, a couple of markers or extrusions past the landscape datum, I think is a worthwhile investigation. And then we often talked about over the course of the semester that, you know, just because it's not the footprint of your building doesn't mean you don't have the ability to touch it, right? Or to do something with it, you know, for you know, like practical reasons of, you know, excavation that certainly would have to happen, but also for reasons, you know, like that you as a designer, you know, are in charge of, you know, orchestrating that whole sequence and the context around it in one way or another. So so yeah, it's just something to keep in mind. Just because it's not within the footprint of your building doesn't mean that you can't do something with it. And I think Andy had brought that up before in the previous project in regards to the trees, and, you know, yeah, you know, it's like you're in charge, right? You're like, you can orchestrate this or very consciously think about what stays and what is removed or rethought as part of the narrative.
Can I add one more thing? I think this, Sarah, I think you said something very interesting, which is the project, you know, deals with this beneath the surface condition. And to me, that's where your project is right now. So I think I agree that the project somehow is quite polite besides the excavation, etc. I'm wondering, how the project start to set up also dramatic, let's say, or extreme conditions of difference, because right now it's pretty homogeneous, the experience that I get walking into your project, right? So is this happens within, the spaces in between, maybe as you enter into this large space, or the way in which you go down? So what are the moments of, let's say, tension, or the way in which relates, to the dramatic or historical condition of the site that you described at the beginning? That's to me where the narrative can go back in sort of embedding the things that you talked about at the beginning to the actual spatial experience that right now is not there. So I think that can potentially really start to link the way in which you want, to look at the site and how this relates to your spatial devices within the project.
I think I hate commenting about drawing styles and technique on final reviews, but I think exactly to that point, to the nuance of the spatial experience. If the plan is rendered right now in a bit of a funny way, that the interior space is black, the same as the section cut in the hillside. And I think that if it were rendered, you know what I mean? If the interior space is actually carved away, so that should be white instead of filled in black. And I think if that convention came through in the drawing, you might see the homogeneity of the space there with the glass and the indoor and out, and you might realize other opportunities to thicken certain walls or add walls to break that up a bit. I think it's just maybe just a drawing technique.
Yeah, we had discussions about that. How do you best represent things that are in ground versus out of the ground? And it was a risk. I think Sarah was courageous to try this out as a method. But yeah, it could go either way, of course.
Regarding the drawing, I think there is something about the directionality of that opens up into one direction. And I would like to know why this last one is just on the opposite direction. And if it is, to be more clear, because it's opening up like this and suddenly the last one is like this, no? So it's either more exaggerated and more intentional, is where you turn, no? Because you do that and then you turn back, or it's following the line. So, but it's just asking why, no? At least it asks to me.
Yeah, I think I could have exaggerated it more, but essentially I just really studied the topography and how that hillside was curving, and then positioned each of those, like sections along that curve to just follow how the hillside naturally curves. So that's why that one is tilted that way, but I think I could have exaggerated a bit more to make that clear.
Okay.
Maybe the argument might come more from the form of the building than the topography, because contour lines are just conventions. So, but yeah. Anyway, I think it's an interesting point.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all for the
looks really
helpful commentary and feedback. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah. We have one more, and that is Ryan. And Ryan, where are you located?
I am second to last on the right.
On the right, okay, great. Okay. Great.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you all for being here again and staying with us this long. My name is Ryan Russell, and this is Historical Extraction. So I would like to start by viewing the historical photo of the oil rigs that used to reside on the site, as you can see here in the top left. This photo is from 1930, and in this image, it's a direct relation to the lake surface. in how there's a built system that I found personally intriguing, and this being the boardwalk along with platforms that house these oil rigs. And then in the second photo, this was taken during the day of our site visit. And in this photo, a couple conditions also stuck out to me. So if you zoom in, right above the peninsula, there's these two structures that are gas extraction that exist there today. They're not quite boardwalks, but they are platforms. And then below, there are the existing piers that used to make up a transport pier to a past oil rig that still exists today. So part of the site analysis is how these industrial systems of resource extraction were so important to Jefferson Island history. And I chose to look into these areas in which old oil rigs exist, and then the relation to the mine shaft and as well as the sinkhole created by the disaster. And then to the right are concept diagrams showing how the past and present resource extraction infrastructures are combined to create a circulation that would ultimately drive the proposal. And then below is a massing diagram about how a roof structure was created. The angle roofs are derived from an abstract combination of the natural landscape as well as the sinkhole. And then separating the program was another way to symbolize the effect that this disaster had on the landscape. And then below, we look at this site plan and then the proposal's relationship to the rest of Jefferson Island. We can see that the proposal resides in the small bay and takes place almost completely on the lake surface or on the water. And then the Joseph Jefferson home can also be seen there in the middle right, along with the alea trees, which is the entrance to the Rip Van Winkle Gardens, Botanical Gardens. And then the pathway along the bank of the lake is also a direct path to the proposal. And then currently this path exists as an alternate way around the site, and it's no clear destination. And just kind of abruptly ends currently. So, and then in the section, at a more abstract way, we can see how the piers and the buildings relate to the surface of the water, as well as to the elevation change to the earth below due to the change in topology from the sinkhole. And then looking at the photos of the model, we take a look into the relationship between the proposed structure and the existing piers. And we can see how that relationship is formed. The boardwalk weaves in and out of these piers as a way to engage the visitor to the site and offer different perspectives of the site's history. And then the concept, or that concept, is furthered in the axonometric, where a closer look at the roofscapes starts to emerge, and how they also relate to the boardwalk and then those existing piers as well. And then windows in these structures are formed in strategic places to allow the visitor even more perspectives of the lake, the island, and then the peninsula that are currently unavailable unless you are on a boat or in a kayak or something like that. And then looking at the plan, the program, as previously stated, has been separated to create new experiences all along the boardwalk. And then the visitor firstly arrives to the lobby where they can get any information or, kind of like a beginning state for the proposal. And then in this building, it's the only one solely on the land, as it acts as this main threshold for the proposal. So you enter on the land and then eventually venture out onto the water. And then continuing onto the water, you can see the first on the right are some of the private buildings like office spaces. And then further down, it's the reading room and library. And in this view, you can start to see views sticking out like back to the Jefferson House or out onto the lake. And finally, reaching at the very end is the cafe that offers an unobstructed view of the rest of the lake back towards the botanical gardens and out towards the rest of the piers. And then looking in the section, you can also start to see where these buildings and their relationship to the proximity of the water surface is a little bit more visible. The depth of the existing and proposed piers is also offered, and it gives a little bit more insight as to how those piers are still existing today, even after the disaster. And then finally, in some rendered perspectives, we can start to see some of these views, looking at opportunities that may not exist currently. One being from a boat looking back towards the proposal. So that's the one on the top. And then that's of the cafe space, and then looking back towards the island. And then below is one looking towards the lake, out onto the lake through the project along this access line. And then finally, one interior that offers that aforementioned museum space with views that kind of start to look out, and then opportunities from dark to light. And specifically, or this is just like an experience as what a visitor could offer as they learn about Jefferson Island, as well as they explore what historical extraction has to offer. So thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Can I ask just a background question? Since this is the first project on the water, really.
Yeah, of course.
Charles, I guess Charles has touched the water also, but is Lake Pinier subject to sea level rise?
I would believe, I don't know if it's sea level rise, but I think in like storms, and if there's a hurricane or something, yes, the water does rise depending on intensity of the storm and amount of rainfall gotten. That was actually a point of contention in early stages of the project. And for sake of interesting perspectives and views, we decided to I chose to make the proposal almost seamless with the water surface level. So,
well, it's potentially an interesting forward-looking perspective on the extraction industry and the nature of this site and its relationship to global change and its implication in global change. If you now need to respond to a consequence of the type of extraction that took place here, and your site is directly impacted over the next time period, it's kind of really one of the first projects that takes a future-looking, forward-thinking approach to extraction and its impacts. So I understand the decision, but I wonder if just by nature of being directly on the water, you're considering the future in a different way. The water introduces an element of future that the others haven't had to deal with.
I agree.
It's interesting to think that the fact that the building is in the water means that if water moves, the building can move, no? Which is something that do not happen if you have the building on the land anyway. So I think thinking about the piers as articulated and the building floating, you might have the response, no, to explore the floatability of your building in a way similar to a boat. It won't be that complicated, I think.
Are you thinking that, Ryan, or not?
I mean, as represented here, they aren't floating. They are situated on platforms with vapor piers. But it is a concept that I find interesting and intriguing. Even in instances that aren't pertaining to my project, I think it's a very topical conversation to have. Especially with the changing climate of, our Earth's environment. And I think it's very relevant to this project and could be something as an exploration that might be very interesting.
I mean, considering the buildings as a measuring device, right, of sorts, right, of those changing conditions, right, and then maybe further thinking about, like an adaptation strategy, I think is really interesting to me. I don't think you haven't gotten there yet, but if you said, okay, this is the buildings are situated here, I was just looking at these images from what is it, Lake Mead in Colorado? It's a water basin, right? But the water level has significantly lowered due to droughts and exploitation of the Colorado River. And you see, like now the lake, the sides of the lake walls are they have become these measuring devices, these datums of, former water levels. And it's just quite drastic, the illustration of the changing conditions. So in a similar way, one could think here, if you were to take this further, about using the buildings as a means of documenting the site condition. Looking forward.
I think this proposal is extremely sensitive in many, many ways. So one is the description you have made of the infrastructures that operate in the landscape with these vertical lines and dots, and the way you're responding to that with architecture. I think it's really appropriate to the site. Maybe so being in the water or not being in the water, what you have taken is an observation of morphology of pieces of architecture infrastructure that operate on the site, and taking that as a formal reference for your building at architectural scale, which I think it's really, really good in that sense, in my view. What might be pushed further, I think, is the fact that architecture typically do not move, but boats move. So I think if you think about these piers or these vertical elements to be even longer and arriving more to the sky, and maybe even bringing electricity to the site and having Wi-Fi and other, so the architecture is also more infrastructural. So you have these vertical, these vertical elements are clearly, let's see if I can draw in that are really like trees that punctuate the place. So it's not only slightly emerging, but you have new ones that are growing. And then your buildings are taken on that, and they move up and down like boats. But with 2 points, they are fixed in plan, but not in sections. And so that way you both respond to the site mutability in terms of floods, but also the architecture becomes a little bit more of an infrastructure. It can even perhaps detach from it and have 2 different positions. No, you might say that, if you organize an exhibit that is, a different one, you might move this, let's say, this piece here in the plan, you move this one here, and you make another expo, that is touching this and then entering this way and this way and this way. So you might arrange your boxes in 2, 3 different positions to make different seasons of the exposition. And then another thing you can do also is to engage the water, and that when you move these pieces, suddenly this water in between the boxes might be aquaculture or whatever, or it may be something related to the water that is also related to the program. So engaging infrastructure, but also landscape and time in the way the building operates makes it almost an infrastructure, which I think is really interesting. I think it's really, really pretty, really exciting proposal.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ryan, I have the same question while you were presenting about the changing of site over time. And I think this is, again, the first project that we see that is on water. But also what I appreciate is that you really started from acknowledging the traces that remains from the extraction process of resources. So this was really your starting point. And actually, it's interesting because I didn't see this until now, that are there and are currently there. So I think that's a quite interesting starting point to begin to build on what's there. And but at the same time, again, work with a different type of landscape, which is the dynamic landscape of water. And agree with the comments. So this, I think, requires our new sets of tools somehow to build and to see how this project might exist now and maybe in the future. And I think this has to do with time, has to do with the different ways in which material exists, I think, in a landscape of water or infrastructure of water. I think there are lots of things at stake here that go beyond, I think, to some of the parameters that perhaps we have used right now to see some other projects. Because as soon as we start to engage water as a design parameter, we cannot think about this building in the traditional way, not traditional, nothing is traditional, but in the way in which we have looked at the previous project. So there is a way in which time has to be embedded, maybe more than other projects. Material has to be re-engaged in a different way. Structure has to be re-engaged, whether they move or not, where they maybe come together at the beginning and then they open up. So I think there is a whole new way in which this project can be rethought. And I think that might also help to break a little bit of the kind of not linearity, but the fact that right now the project really exists as a kind of dual condition. So there is a continuity of the path, but along the path you encounter these programs, these boxes right now, which to the level that I think this inserting and adding the dynamic condition on the water might start to disrupt a little bit the system. Like in the previous project that we talked about, some are very polite, they work well, but what else, right? I think in your case, it's the water can be the parameter of disruption that start to dictate a new way, another way of looking at your project. Whether it's to material, to flexibility of some of the parts, to reconfigurability, perhaps. Maybe when the water starts to rise, everything comes back to the land. And maybe when there is, maybe there is a dispersion and a collection of the system somehow. Then maybe you even need less program. I don't know, right? So I think there is a little bit of that. Which makes your project, I think, fascinating for the discussion that we might, think about engaging the site, a different type of site for these projects.
Yeah, I agree. I find, this conversation of the water and it being its own parameter, something that, now that it's being talked about a little bit more, it's something that I wish I paid attention to a little bit more throughout the semester. Because yeah, I totally agree. I think, there are opportunities now for this program to become even more untraditional than, like you said. And yeah, I agree.
Well, when you reconceive the project as infrastructure, I think you ask questions about function in a different way. Mm-hmm. And kind of to what you're describing, the examples from the 30s and the oil derricks, that type of infrastructure is purely functional. It wasn't intended to be aesthetic. It was minimalist to accomplish its purpose. So the verticality of the derrick is intentional. It's related to the length of the pipe, and et cetera. And so I think when now you think about your primary project as the dock, maybe as the infrastructural backbone, what other kinds of functional questions are raised, and then how do you respond to them? I think one might be climatic. I'm surprised there's no outdoor spaces, that all of these are interior boxes. It's typically cooler to be on the water, but you also don't have shade. It's going to be hot out there in the summer on that dock. I think there's elements of horizontality and verticality in view that maybe aren't available on other sites. There's the floating aspect that we talked about, but there's also barges and boats coming and going. Maybe your gallery goes out and floats over the sinkhole, comes back 3 times a day, or there's a mobile component that harkens back to that barge infrastructure, in addition to the permanent aspect. So I think the point is just in addition, and then the water and power and these other types of things that you typically think of as infrastructure. So there just might be a recalibration of program and function as soon as you stop thinking about it as a building.
Mm-hmm. In terms of materiality, I'm curious to, also you can take the path of industrial or pseudo industrial look, or a totally different path that can be also artistic, or if it's a stainless steel and it disappears totally, mm-hmm. or if it's a rock and and then suddenly it's like almost a contradiction of something heavy that is floating. There's a lot of themes that can be either way, but it's interesting perhaps to think about that. Again, if it's a rock and it's heavy but it's floating, or if it's disappearing, or if it's like looking at like a barge, or what.
Okay.
Really good design, excellent drawings, and yeah, congratulations. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
I think these are great comments. And, if we had had more time, the semester was awkwardly compressed towards the end and in general, and there was some extraneous circumstances that kind of made the whole thing, a little cumbersome. But if we had had more time, I think we would have had those discussions, like I agree that the dynamics of the water, the opportunities that arise from that, and then also seeing this as an infrastructure component, which I think we did touch upon that a little bit, by considering the walkway, right, as this extension or grid, right, that offers these opportunities for a great suggestion for spaces in between, for extensions, right, for contrast. I think those are all directions the project could have gone in or explored further. So I think it's very useful. And Ryan, if you build your next project in the water, then I encourage to really to take some of these things more into consideration. But well-resolved project, and I think it offers a lot of opportunity within it and thinking ahead as well.
Thank you.
Okay, great. This brings us to the end of our presentations. At this point, we like to ask if there are any final comments that the critics would like to make or address the group with.
I can go if no one else.
Sure.
Well, it's been 3 years or 4 years since I was last on a 2-lane review, and I think
you have to come back soon.
Well, I hope we can be in person again soon, but I think you all should be really proud of what you've accomplished, and not only given the disruptions of this fall. I know some of the things you went through from a couple of our interns here in the office from 2-lane, but I think the overall level of representation and presentation and narrative it is higher than any other 2-lane review that I've seen. So I commend you on that. There's just a clarity that came through, I think, in all of your work that was impressive, and the level of drawing at this stage in your graduate career. It's just overall quite impressive. So congratulations on that. I think if there's maybe two comments overall. One about landscape. I would have liked to see a little bit more thought about impact in the landscape, or at least procession. Thinking of landscape as part of the building itself, part of the site experience. There were so many strong architectural moments. Not a lot of thinking about sense of arrival or sequencing in terms of what's represented. There was some talk about it, but we'd just like to consider a little more broadly the nature of site, specifically around landscape. And the other, I was surprised that there was not much exploration of vernacular. And I understand this is an industrial site, and there are a lot of other factors at play, but Louisiana has a strong climate tradition, this part of the state, about vernacular forms, even warehouses and some of the other salt mine warehouses on Avery Island, tobacco barns, other forms, porches that might have been operative here. And so maybe just something to think about in site analyses and thinking about the places where we are and where we work, how we convey a sense of place. Whether you choose to engage vernacular or not, I think it's important to at least maybe study, represent, or consider its function. But overall, congratulations. Highly impressed with all of the works, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much for joining us. You'll be back.
I'll follow up on some of these comments. So thanks again for having me, and I really enjoyed seeing the project and also seeing the range of approaches that, so each project quite different, but also I think that we're in all of them, very different, but also similar in a way because of the clarity of the process that you all went through. So I really appreciated to see different ways in which the project touch on the different parts of the landscape, different parts within the site, And so overall, I think there was a quite strong consistency in terms of representation, especially of the two-dimensional, I would say the two-dimensional plan and the diagrams. I think overall this was quite consistent. One thing that I was missing a little bit, I think, in some of the projects was the more experiential understanding of the project themselves and some key moments within each project. Not because of renderings that need to be, need to look photorealistic or not, but really the understanding, I think, in some level, really the human perspective of your projects. And I think in some cases was clear, but other projects needed that in order to validate the initial narrative. So that might be something that is a post-production component that you guys add at the end. But I think some project would have really benefit from the level of, let's say, from the ground perspective, let's say, understanding of experience of moving through the site, etc. And agree with Andy's comment about the engagement, I think, and this, is connected to the comment about the experience, how some of these buildings that, again, were given as a building in the sense you guys were given a program that is pretty precise in terms of square footage, etc. But at the same time, I think the landscape here plays a pretty important role, very important role. So I think some projects did engage the landscape, some almost, did not engage at all, where the project could have been almost not anywhere, but I think that the potential of really working as a dialogue within the landscape, within the site, it's something that almost, I think, in our project could have been, much more embedded. And this, again, is really to build on what you have done so far. But overall, I think I really appreciate the clarity. I think in all of them, there was a very clear party as a starting point. And that's, I think, was really the strength that for all the projects. So thank you again.
Thank you,
Last comment from me. You see me
Yes.
already every 2 days a week, so you're fed up of me. But yeah, just to restate, I totally agree with the clarity of the parties and the diagrams across all the proposal. That's really clear. Also, I have the same sense in relation to the landscape and a little bit more engagement on the landscape, not only on the arrival, but in the way, not only through the views, but in this more specific appreciations of your site. What are the specific trees and what are the size of these trees, etc. So being hyper-specific in relation to not only the topography, but also the vegetation that exists on the site. I think also, I was amazed by the wide range of drawing types. So the section, the plan, the axon, the perspective, the model. So the models, in the cases in which they were used, they were really, really fertile in conveying or evocating paths in next steps. So I think the model is really, really, so it a really wide range of formal explorations that makes the whole sequence of the studio really successful. And you can tell based on the results. And then perhaps something that the explanation that you've done through concept board, sometimes you manage it well, but maybe some of you need to organize more of a PDF sequence to explain the project rather than moving to the concept board. That makes perhaps the explanation more loose. So if you had to do something, I think it's about organizing your thoughts through the sequence of a PDF, and that can translate into a CV or a portfolio more easily than just here's what I have, no? Everything at, like boom, this is it, no? The curating the sequence of how do you explain the project is also important. Anyway, congratulations. It's really, really, really consistent, really good, enjoyable.
Great. Those were excellent comments. Again, thank you so much to Andy, Margarita, and Marcella for spending the whole afternoon and for these excellent insights. And I think it really helped the projects. Also, one more comment, don't stop to think about these projects, right? I mean, like, you know, each semester, right, and each topic area, right, is a stepping stone. And you know, some of you might already discover, you know, what you're really interested in, you know, what your strengths are, you know, and, you know, use that as a point of departure to think about things further. Might it be in regards to landscape, ecologies, you know, vernacular systems, right? Keep the research and keep the explorations going. I think that's really important, right? It shouldn't be a check-off thing. It should be, you know, a continuation of thought processes as you're segueing through the next semesters. Okay.
Yeah, following on that, just Cordula,
Yeah.
There are some people that say that architects do the same project over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that in the moment in which you are now, you have discovered like seeds of thinking that you might explore during 10 years, you know? So that's really the moment in which you are now, the obsessions you have are going to be with you forever. You might have other ones, but the ones you have right now are really important. So creating them and taking time to explain to yourself what you have done is a way of saving them for the future as well. So,
right. Very well put. Okay, excellent. With this, we will conclude. Thank you so much, and thank you to all the students for all of your dedication and powering through this intense semester. I think the work looked really good today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Well done.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye.